Chapter 276. Long Cheng Wuji returned a smile. Although he was sitting below, his domineering aura was no less intimidating than Gong Cheng's. This made Gong Cheng sigh with emotion. This world will soon be the world of these young people. This prince is here for official business, and it's an important matter. I heard that Dai Yu State intends to trade with Yuheng, and to unify the banknotes with the banks. King Lu Yi went straight to the point, and the emperor naturally didn't shirk away. That's right. Now that the four countries are at peace, why should we close the country? If we want to develop, we can only take the advantages of others and make up for our own shortcomings. First, we can promote the integration between countries and reduce friction. Second, we hope that the common people can live a better life. These words were said by Gong Yimo to persuade him to open the country's door. Although the meaning was shallow and the reasoning was straightforward, if he really did it, not only would it be a political achievement that would be passed down through the ages, but it would also be a great development step. Although it required courage, Gong Cheng was old at heart, so he wasn't afraid of this little risk. In the end, it was because Gong Yimo had firearms in her hands. Once a war broke out, she wouldn't ignore it. This might be the source of Gong Cheng's courage to open the country's door. Dai Yu State's monarch is really far-sighted. This prince admires his vision. Long Cheng Wuji flattered first, then said, "This prince will not beat around the bush. This time, I came with sincerity to represent Lu Yi and cooperate with Dai Yu State. Whether it's the cooperation with the banks or the trade between the two countries, this prince is very much looking forward to it." His sincerity was to condone his fiancée's attempt to ruin the royal sister's coronation ceremony. Below, Gong Dai listened coldly and smiled without saying a word. Gong Cheng was slightly surprised, then smiled. "This is a big matter. I wonder if King Lu Yi would like to discuss it in private." Long Cheng Wuji looked at the people present. There weren't many. No need, this is a good thing. When his gaze fell on Gong Dai, he slightly narrowed his eyes. It's better to get this done quickly. Emperor Gong couldn't help but give him a toast and said with a smile, "In that case, I would like to know, how does Lu Yi want to cooperate?" He concealed the shrewdness in his eyes and asked for guidance. Back then, the reason why Dai Yu State and Yuheng cooperated so quickly was because of the contract in Moa's hands. It allowed Dai Yu State to be in an invincible position. But Lu Yi? If it was just an equal cooperation, he was very worried that the other party would fall out with him one day. Long Cheng Wuji smiled. "Of course, it's an equal cooperation. Lu Yi and Dai Yu State are exchanging what they need and unifying the banknotes." Emperor Gong's expression froze, and after a long time, he smiled deeply. "Everyone present is my confidant, so I will speak frankly. After all, there is Yuheng between Lu Yi and Dai Yu State. If this kind of cooperation changes too much, I will feel very uneasy. After all, I'm old, and my thoughts are heavy. I'm not as courageous as you young people." Long Cheng Wuji smiled very graciously. "Of course, we came in a hurry with sincerity. If Dai Yu State's monarch agrees, this prince is willing to marry my sister to Dai Yu State, and make the two countries happy." When Emperor Gong heard this, he really felt that Lu Yi was sincere. After all, Lu Yi's people paid attention to bloodline. Princesses and other nobles would only marry among the upper echelons, but something was still missing. A princess was not enough to make him make up his mind. Long Cheng Wuji said again, "I don't know if the Dai Yu State's monarch has any other requests. You can bring it up, and we can have a good talk." He kicked the question back, making it difficult for Emperor Gong. He subconsciously glanced at Gong Dai, and Gong Dai continued, "It's not difficult to make a deal. This son has a proposal, but I don't know if I should say it." Emperor Gong hurriedly said, "There's no harm in saying it." Gong Dai smiled lightly. "All the money is stored in the bank, and we have to pay interest. So if Lu Yi can agree that in the future, when the two countries trade, Lu Yi's people will withdraw money from Dai Yu State, and Dai Yu State won't have to pay interest, then the cooperation can be expected." Long Cheng Wuji's eyes darkened, and with a deep anger, he sneered at Gong Dai. "If that's the case, your Dai Yu State really has no sincerity in cooperating." Gong Dai looked at him with a wine cup in his hand, and smiled coldly. "Does King Lu Yi not know if there is sincerity or not?" If you agree to this condition, perhaps there will be an additional surprise. Long Cheng Wuji knew that he was referring to Hua Ju Wuyo. He actually dared to threaten him? Emperor Gong looked on coldly. One side had a fiery aura, but was suppressing the boiling lava. The other side was as cold as ice, but seemed to have victory in his grasp. He didn't say anything. It wasn't good for him to intervene in this young man's matter. Gong Dai put down his wine cup and said lightly, "You might as well consider it. Who told Long Cheng Wuji to climb into the royal sister's bed last night? Then he should be prepared to be forced by him. One must know that he didn't want to make such an excessive request." Long Cheng Wuji waved his hand. "Let's wait for your country's eldest princess to come. This prince needs to think about this matter carefully." He thought that even if Gong Yimo wasn't easy to deal with, she wouldn't make such a rude request. Was she forcing him, Lu Yi, to be inferior to her? So he might as well talk to her. If they reached an agreement, presumably Gong Dai wouldn't be able to say anything. At this time, a sweet-sounding laughter was heard. "Are you guys talking about me?" Long Cheng Wuji looked over, but for some reason, his pupils shrank, and his thin lips were tightly pursed. Gong Yimo was wearing a dark black palace dress, striding over. Like 100 flowers blooming, she was instantly eye-catching. There were large red flowers on the black skirt, like a fire blooming in the dark, which made her skin look as white as jade. Her collar and sleeves were embroidered with totems with golden threads, which were thick and luxurious, and had an indescribable sense of beauty. At this time, she only had a golden crown on her head, and her fine black hair was half tied up, half draped over her shoulders, beautiful and heroic. Gong Dai saw Gong Yimo winking at him, and for some reason, his heart was beating fast. She rarely dressed herself up, but when she dressed up, it actually made Gong Dai, who had been calm for a long time, feel his heart skip a beat. He looked straight at that aggressive beauty, and fell head over heels for it time and time again. Gong Yimo bowed to the emperor, and then to King Lu Yi, with an extraordinary bearing, and revealed a smile. "I heard that Lu Yi wants to cooperate with Dai Yu state. This is a good thing. This consort is not talented, but it just so happens that this consort is the initiator of this matter. If King Lu Yi has something to discuss, why not discuss it with this consort?" King Lu Yi wanted to laugh for no reason. This woman was really different. Yesterday, she dared to press him down on the chair and do those embarrassing things, but today, she could pretend not to know him, and only talk about business without talking about romance. This prince came with sincerity, but your country doesn't seem to appreciate it. "Oh." Gong Yimo blinked. "I'd like to hear the details." King Lu Yi stared at her, his blue to purple eyes carrying a trace of a smile. "This prince is willing to marry my younger sister to Dai Yu state to facilitate the reconciliation between the two countries. However, your country's prince said that when Lu Yi's citizens withdraw money from Dai Yu state, they have to give up the interest they should receive. Isn't such an unfair agreement humiliating? If he really agreed, once he returned to the country, he would be cursed by Lu Yi's citizens." Chapter 277. Gong Yimo glanced at Gong Dai and smiled. "Yuan, this agreement is unreasonable." The moment she said that, the ministers and the emperor all stared at her as if they didn't believe that she would speak up for an outsider. King Lu Yi smiled. "Princess is still the most reasonable one." Was he implying that the others were not sensible? Gong Yimo rubbed her chin and said calmly, "Transactions between two countries should be equal. This consort is only helping reason and not kinship." As soon as her words came out, many of the people present took a deep breath and showed a look of disapproval. The emperor frowned, unsure of what Gong Yimo was planning to do in the end. At this moment, she winked at Long Cheng Wuji. "Does King Lu Yi agree with this consort's words?" Long Cheng Wuji thought carefully and didn't find any loopholes. He nodded. "Of course I agree." When Gong Yimo heard that, she smiled, revealing her white teeth. King Lu Yi is indeed generous. However, let's put this cooperation aside for now and talk about these war horses. How many are you willing to export in a year? War horses. Long Cheng Wuji's expression darkened. What does princess mean? Lu Yi's war horses are not allowed to be bought or sold. This is the iron law of Lu Yi's dynasty. Gong Yimo finally revealed her fangs and quickly followed up. In other words, King Luyi keeps on talking about a fair cooperation, but in the end, he wants to keep it to himself. Long Cheng Wuji's expression darkened. It was extremely ugly. Since he had already said it, it would be embarrassing if he changed his words. He thought of an excuse and said, Princess might not know, but other than the iron law set by the ancestors, Luyi had an outbreak of plague 2 years ago and all the horse farms were affected. Luyi was too busy to take care of himself, so he couldn't say anything. Gong Yimo raised her brows. Is that so? Her white finger pointed at her forehead. But why did this consort hear that Hua Ju's family has already recovered? Long Cheng Wuji suddenly gritted his teeth, wishing he could strangle Hua Ju Wuyo to death. There's no such thing. Princess, please don't be biased. Gong Yimo laughed. Whether or not this consort is biased, this consort doesn't know, but this consort has heard that Luyi wants to open up a path with Yuheng. It can be seen that King Luyi is being modest. There are still many horses in your country. Otherwise, how could you casually support a passage? She even knew about this. Long Cheng Wuji was a little surprised, and believed that it must have been Flower Boat Wuyo who told him the secret. Otherwise, Gong Yimo would not have known about these secret. Thinking of this, he was even more dissatisfied with Hua Ju Wuyo. But at this moment, it was useless to be dissatisfied. He had no way to back down. If he said that her information was fake, then wouldn't he be slapping himself in the face when the passage was opened? He had to think carefully about this matter. However, Gong Yimo would not give him the chance to calm down. She took a few steps towards him and said aggressively, As for the iron law of our ancestors, King Luyi's vision needs to keep up with the times. Right now, the 4 countries are at peace, and opening up the country to trade is a good thing. We've already done this much, so why do you insist on sticking to the old law? Furthermore, you said that you came with sincerity. This consort believes you because this consort knows that you really did bring a noble daughter. Long Cheng Wuji suppressed his anger and said, She's not. Gong Yimo suddenly interrupted him with a smile. King Luyi, don't joke around. You said that you wanted to marry your sister to Dai Yu State, so you came with sincerity. How could you not bring the princess with you? She was clearly threatening him. If he did not agree to sell horses, then she had the ability to marry Flower Boat Wuyo to Dai Yu State. When that time came, the great King Luyi would sell his fiancée for a partnership. Let's see how he would explain it. Long Cheng Wuji really wanted to stop her chattering little mouth at this moment. She was just a woman, so why was she more aggressive than the countless warriors on the battlefield? He had underestimated her. He always thought that Gong Yimo's every step was guided by Gong Dai, but now he finally realized. So Gong Yimo was the one guiding him. He had to take Flower Boat Wuyo with him, but he could not change his words. He either agreed to Gong Yimo's request, or agreed to Gong Dai's request. However, he was extremely unwilling to do either of them. When had he ever made a losing deal in his life? Gong Yimo saw that there was a thin layer of sweat on his forehead, so she relaxed her tone and spoke softly. King Luyi is sincere, so my Dai Yu State naturally will not be stingy. I heard that Luyi and Yuheng have not finished discussing the details of the horse path. This consort is not talented, but this consort has a few ideas. You should know that the canals in Dai Yu State were all this consort's ideas. A horse path is not difficult. As for the choice, I hope that King Luyi can be decisive. This consort's patience is limited, and I don't like to haggle over every ounce. Her words were like a slap and a sweet date, and it even contained a hidden threat. However, the ideas she mentioned were exactly what the King of Luyi desperately needed right now. At this time, he had already acknowledged Gong Yimo's talent. After all, the effects of the canals were right in front of him, and Luyi had also started to try them out. So even though he was unwilling, he could only admit defeat. Gong Yimo was too powerful. If he made a mistake, he would lose the whole game. If he continued to argue, he was afraid that the result would be the same. So he gritted his teeth and raised his cup. All right. This consort wishes the 2 countries a happy cooperation. Soon, a palace servant served wine. Gong Yimo held the cup with her jade fingers and calmly saluted him. As for the details, this consort, as a woman, will not participate. I believe that King Lu Yi also has an idea about the number of war horses to be exported. If the cooperation in the end is happy, this consort does not mind giving a farewell gift as a gift. She meant that if he asked for too little and she was not satisfied, she might not return Hua Ju Wuyo to him. Longcheng Wuji looked at her again and gnashed his teeth. He wanted to give her a few whips, but he could only smile. This consort will thank you in advance. Gong Yimo smiled when she heard this. She drank the wine and smiled proudly at Gong Cheng. Gong Cheng also did not expect that Gong Yimo would be so powerful. Her methods and intelligence did not lose to any of his sons. It was a pity that she was a girl. After that, things went smoothly. Moreover, Gong Yimo did not have anything to do. She was happy to be free. A few days later, when they sent off Lu Yi and the others, Hua Ju Wuyo followed behind King Lu Yi dispiritedly. It was obvious that he was scolded harshly by him. Gong Dai rode on a horse and sent them to the city gate. Longcheng Wuji also rode on a horse. He was very disappointed when he did not see Gong Yimo's figure. But it did not matter. Although he lost this time, next time, he would definitely make Gong Yimo look good. And Gong Dai, he had prepared a big gift for him. Many thanks for Dai Yu State's hospitality. This trip was too rushed, so my sister did not come along. In a few days, Lu Yi will marry the princess with a big gift. Together, the two countries will be happy. Gong Dai looked at him coldly. Farewell, King Lu Yi. Farewell. Longcheng Wuji angrily turned around and the group quickly left. He wanted to see if Gong Dai could still be so calm after knowing the details of the cooperation. Chapter 278. The palace was decorated with lanterns and colored banners because the crown prince was coming back. Gong Yimo was a little conflicted. So much time had passed, if her brother still hadn't let go of his obsession with her, how awkward would it be for them to see each other all the time? But even if it was awkward, what would come would come. She went to the palace with a trace of luck in her heart. Seeing Gong Yimo arrive, Emperor Cheng hurriedly waved at her from the imperial study. Moa, come and take a look. Father, why are you looking for me in such a hurry? Gong Yimo walked over with a smile. She saw that he was holding an exquisite portrait in his hand. Looking at the dress, it wasn't a woman from Dai Yu State, but she looked somewhat familiar. This is... Gong Yimo subconsciously looked at the handwriting under the portrait. Princess Lu Yi. She raised her eyebrows slightly. She didn't expect that Longcheng Wuji would marry her to Dai Yu State. That was Lu Yi's most honorable little princess. Emperor Cheng smiled with satisfaction. This woman's status is honorable, and she is quite favored. It's just that I have a headache. Who should I marry her to? His words made Gong Yimo's face pale for some reason. The crown prince. But he's going to marry the Su family's daughter in a few days. The other princes have already married, it's really hard to choose. He said this, then glanced at Gong Yimo's expression. Gong Yimo naturally knew what he meant. Father, you want to marry this woman to Gong Dai? Emperor Cheng smiled and nodded. You still understand my thoughts. Speaking of this, he sighed again, but Gong Dai, that stinking brat, is too insensible. I told him about this matter, but he said that he's still young and doesn't have the heart to marry. But he doesn't look at how old he is. When I was his age, I already had 4 sons. Gong Yimo couldn't help but smile bitterly. She didn't expect that Gong Dai, who had always been a young man in her heart, had unknowingly grown up. In ancient times, he had also reached the age of late marriage. Since Gong Dai has already rejected her, he probably doesn't have any feelings for her. Father, why did you call me here? She pretended not to know. Gong Cheng glared at her. Don't play dumb, that stinky brat is getting more and more disobedient. You're the only one who might listen to your words. You're the elder sister. Don't you care about your younger brother's marriage? He was afraid that it would be fine if she didn't care, but once she did, she would get herself into trouble. At this moment, Gong Cheng suddenly sighed. We know that the two of you have a good relationship. It's not much worse than siblings from the same mother, but... We've been hearing some rumors these past few years. Gong Yimo suddenly looked at him, causing him to wave his hands repeatedly. Don't worry, Imperial Father isn't such a foolish person. You and Gong Dai are both smart children. How could you do something unwise? It's just that. Since you said that you won't marry for the rest of your life, Gong Dai can't possibly not marry for the rest of his life, right? Wouldn't that be confirming the rumors? Gong Yimo carefully discerned Gong Cheng's expression. She wanted to see if he really trusted her or if he was using this matter to test her. Gong Cheng actually felt a little uncomfortable being stared at by Gong Yimo like this. When Gong Yimo wasn't smiling, her eyes were very intimidating. Generally, those who weren't strong-willed wouldn't dare to look her in the eyes. Imperial father wants me to persuade Gong Dai to marry a wife. Her voice was deep and slow, with a hint of a smile that could not be understood. Gong Cheng slightly raised his eyebrows. Why not? The eldest sister is like a mother. You've been taking care of him since he was young. How could he not listen to you? Gong Yimo chuckled. Suddenly, she felt a trace of pain in her heart. When she chose to become the princess of Dai Yu State, she didn't expect that there would be such a day. But she couldn't find any reason to refute. In terms of family background, Lu Yi was the youngest and most favored princess. She was more than enough to be a match for Gong Dai. In terms of appearance, talent, and temperament, the princess she met in her previous life could be said to be worthy of her reputation. Moreover, Gong Dai had also reached the age of marriage. At this time, she really couldn't find a reason to refute the emperor. Moreover, why should she refute? Could it be that she really wants Gong Dai to not marry for the rest of his life? Can she still respond to him? Imperial father. This woman is naturally very good. Gong Yimo was a little confused about what she was saying. Her head was dizzy. This matter. I will mention it to Gong Dai. As for whether he agrees or not, it's really not something I can control. Hearing this, Gong Cheng laughed and patted her on the shoulder. Don't worry, your words are much more useful than Zhen's. Gong Yimo smiled faintly and bitterly. When she finally walked out of Jiaoyang Hall in a daze, she suddenly shivered. At this time, the Empress actually sent someone to find her. Gong Yimo was already distracted and was pulled to Feng Qi Palace in a daze. At this time, Feng Qi Palace was very lively. It turned out that the Empress held a small tea party and invited many officials' wives and daughters. The atmosphere was just right. Seeing so many people, Gong Yimo's spirit was lifted. She didn't think about those messy things and strode in. Feng Gui Rong Ggu State's eldest princess has arrived. When her title came out, everyone present was stunned and then quickly got up to salute. Gong Yimo. Why did she come here? When the Empress saw Gong Yimo, she was very happy to take her hand and said angrily, You've been back for so long, but you haven't come to see Imperial Mother. Moa, you're really biased. Gong Yimo was guided to the seat of honor on the left by the Empress and sat down. She then toasted the Empress with a cup of wine and smiled apologetically. Imperial Mother is right. Ursi Hen will punish myself with 3 cups of wine to express my apology. As she spoke, she really drank 3 cups of wine in a row. Who was the Empress? At a glance, she could tell that Gong Yimo was in a bad mood, so she easily bypassed her and introduced her to her. You rarely attend these women's banquets since you were young. You probably don't know your Crown Prince brother's future in-laws, right? She joked, then pointed to the First Lady on the right and said, This is the wife of the Duke Shen, a first-rank titled honorary madam. And next to her is your future sister-in-law, Marquis Zhen's legitimate daughter, Su Miaolan. Gong Yimo then turned her attention to the seat directly opposite and saw Su Miaolan for the second time. The Duke Shen's wife, Madame Zhong, hurriedly stood up and bowed to Gong Yimo. Because of Gong Yimo's status, it was far from what people like them could hope to reach. Ursi Hen greets eldest princess. This is my daughter. She was young back then. If my daughter has offended you in any way, I hope princess will be magnanimous enough to forgive her. Was she talking about what happened at the tea party back then? Gong Yimo raised the teacup with one hand and smiled without saying a word. She directly looked at Su Miaolan, who had been avoiding her from the start. Su Miaolan was tugged by her mother, but she also took into account the situation. She gritted her teeth and obediently bowed. Ursi Hen greets eldest princess. At this moment, her mother tugged at her from behind again, causing Su Miaolan to suppress the resentment in her heart and speak in a low voice. Ursi Hen was muddle-headed at that time. I hope Princess won't blame me. After speaking, she lowered her head, clearly enduring silently. She was the future crown prince consort. In the future, when Gong Yimo saw her, she would have to respectfully call her sister-in-law. She didn't believe that Gong Yimo would bite her and not let go. But now, she had no choice but to lower her head. Because Gong Yimo's status was high, even her father could only bow to her. As expected, Gong Yimo didn't haggle over anything. She held the teacup and smiled faintly. No need to be so courteous. Everything that happened in the past, Bengong has long forgotten. She was speaking the truth. This kind of small matter wasn't worthy of her jealousy. The Empress smiled and said, Moa is still the most sensible. As she spoke, she even glared at the Dukshan's wife. You're just too careful. How could Moa be that kind of woman who haggles over every little thing? The Dukshan's wife nodded repeatedly, praising Gong Yimo as if it didn't cost money. The other madams also chimed in, praising Gong Yimo to the heavens. Gong Yimo put down the teacup and picked up the wine cup again. She took a sip and didn't know why, but she suddenly felt like laughing. Just a moment ago, the emperor was afraid that those rumors would come true and wanted her to act as a matchmaker for Gong Dai. The next moment, the empress was afraid that Gong Che still had feelings for her when he returned, so she hurriedly shoved her daughter-in-law to her. Were they all afraid that she would harm their son? How interesting. Chapter 279. The more she thought about it, the more she found it interesting. She drank one cup after another. God knows, when she was reincarnated, she really didn't want to have any emotional involvement. She didn't know why things had turned out this way, and why these two people liked her. Therefore, she waved her hand and everyone quieted down. Finally, she could have some peace and quiet. Everyone thought she had something to say, so they listened attentively. Gong Yimo just raised her eyes and said lightly, Lower your voices, I'm a little tired. When she said this, everyone's face turned ugly. Even the Empress felt that Gong Yimo was dissatisfied with her way of doing things, so she gave her some face. But what could she do? She had told her son before, and if her son listened to her, she wouldn't have to do this. But she was the one who invited them, and she couldn't say that Gong Yimo was tired, so she was in a difficult position. At this time, a very perceptive woman said, That's right, the princess is still young, so she definitely doesn't like us women talking about our daily lives. Why don't we perform? The ladies here are all talented, so we should show them to Her Highness. In the future, we hope that Her Highness will choose a good husband. The Empress subconsciously looked at Gong Yimo, but seeing that she didn't react, she nodded and smiled. Then I'm blessed. I wonder what the ladies have been learning at home. She asked this, and there were many voices that agreed. In the end, she was the Empress, and to be honest, even Liu Xianfei and the other concubines had to avoid her. The only one who could make the Empress so passive was Gong Yimo. This made the Empress, who had been living a smooth life for several years, a little angry. But she couldn't do anything to Gong Yimo. She didn't have any way to control Gong Yimo. The first to come out was the daughter of the Qin family, Qin Ku-er. She was 18 years old, and should have been married long ago, but she was too outstanding and picky, so the marriage was delayed until now. So, she was probably the oldest lady present, aside from Su Miaolan. She bowed to the Empress, and then to Gong Yimo. This subject's daughter has embarrassed herself. May your Highness please lend me the zither. The Empress smiled and waved her hand. She said to the palace maid, Go, bring me the phoenix gourd. Yes. The eunuchs moved quickly. Gong Yimo watched coldly from the side. After Qin Ku-er tested the notes, she began to play. The melodious sound of the zither rang out. On a winter day like this, it sounded a little lonely. It was probably similar to her current mood. Gong Yimo suddenly thought that if Gong Dai really wanted to marry, Qin Ku-er would be a good choice. At least she wasn't a strong person. Compared to that scheming little princess, she was much better. As she thought of this, she continued to drink. The alcohol, which had no alcohol content, seemed to be making her drunk. One performance ended, and another began. There weren't many people present, so these ladies were bold enough to show their best sides. The Empress would occasionally comment, and the atmosphere gradually livened up. At this time, a lady's performance of the flute received unanimous praise. The Empress also praised her and gave her many rewards. After receiving the praise and rewards, she didn't go down. Instead, she bowed to Gong Yimo and said, "This subject's daughter's skills are insignificant and can't be considered elegant. If we really want to talk about it, Your Highness is the role model that I admire. I wonder if we have the honor of appreciating Your Highness' talent today?" Her words caused the Empress' expression to stiffen. Even her mother's expression changed in an instant. "Chang'e, don't mess around." Then she hurriedly stood up and apologized to Gong Yimo. "Please forgive me, Your Highness. My younger daughter doesn't know any better. Please forgive her." Gong Yimo was immediately called out, and her gaze fell on the lady on the stage. Before she could speak, Su Miaolan suddenly smiled and interrupted, "It's no wonder that younger sister Shu is curious. Us sisters often say in private that Your Highness is the role model for us noble ladies to follow. We just don't know what kind of talents Your Highness has. As long as Your Highness shows a little bit of it, it will definitely be popular in the city, and everyone will fight to imitate you." Her words seemed to be praise, but who didn't know that Gong Yimo was born in the cold palace? Other than not knowing where she learned martial arts, in many people's eyes, she might have many wonderful ideas, but it was very likely that she was illiterate. And the industries that she established were naturally infinitely weakened in the eyes of women who cared about the harem. They thought that those men were looking for novelty and praised her too much. The Marchioness really wanted to sigh. She really didn't understand why her daughter was so stubborn. Could it be that she wanted to see Gong Yimo make a fool of herself? But Su Miaolan was stubborn. She was going to be the crown princess soon. Why should she be inferior to Gong Yimo? She didn't believe that the Empress wouldn't help her. Gong Yimo smiled. She didn't answer her question and directly asked a question of her own. "I heard that Miss Su's dancing skills are graceful. Would this consort have the fortune to see it?" Gong Yimo's words caused Su Miaolan's expression to stiffen. "This subject is talking about, you're not willing?" Gong Yimo directly interrupted her domineeringly, slightly raising her brows. At this time, she was sitting on the couch, one hand supporting her chin as she lazily asked, "Are you not willing to perform for this consort, or are you not willing to perform for Imperial Mother?" Su Miaolan hurriedly got up and kneeled in front of the Empress. "This subject absolutely doesn't have that thought." The Empress sneered, not denying it. Gong Yimo clearly wasn't a person who was easy to talk to, but Su Miaolan wanted to hit the muzzle of the gun in a moment of anger. Then, the Empress had nothing to say. She couldn't let Gong Yimo lose face for Su Miaolan. Since Miaolan has the heart, then let's do it. This consort's eyes are blessed. Su Miaolan raised her head in astonishment. She clearly wanted to embarrass Gong Yimo, but she didn't expect that her future mother-in-law wouldn't side with her at all. In the end, her horizons were limited. She didn't understand what kind of status a title bestowed by the emperor with a wave of his hand was equivalent to. Or, it could be said that she thought too highly of herself. She had no choice but to dance this dance. However, if she didn't dance well, it would be an undeserved reputation. If she danced well, it would be like she was a performer trying to win a smile from a superior. She couldn't help but feel even more resentful. Could it be that she couldn't compare to Gong Yimo even after becoming the crown princess? The music started. Even if she was unwilling, she had no choice but to dance. At this time, all the Furans present quieted down, afraid that they would touch Gong Yimo's reverse scale. The Empress's attitude raised their understanding of Gong Yimo's status by a level. She was someone who could defeat the crown princess with a single word. At this time, someone whispered something into the Empress's ear. The originally gloomy Empress's eyes lit up when she heard this. She immediately stood up. The moment she stood up, a man's laughter came from afar. "Imperial Mother, are you surprised?" Che. Gong Che had actually returned in advance, and had even come in secret to give her a huge surprise. Even Gong Yimo was slightly dazed as she looked towards the door. It was indeed him, Gong Che. He was now 21 years old and had completely shed his youthful immaturity. Now, he was successful and famous. His status was stable, and his temperament was restrained. His appearance was even more handsome. He was like a beautiful jade that made people gasp in admiration. Chapter 280. Gong Che. Gong Yimo couldn't describe what she was feeling. She only felt that this scene seemed to overlap with her previous life. This kind of winter banquet, this kind of scene. She actually preferred men like Gong Che, who was as gentle as jade. That was why she had been so desperate when she saw him in her previous life. However, he had also taught her a lesson, and that was that wishful thinking on one's part would not keep someone. That was why she had ended up in such a state, and had made such a vow. Gong Che's gaze almost immediately fell on Gong Yimo. Only he could understand the intense collision at that moment. He concealed the deep passion and desire in his eyes. With just one glance, he didn't dare to look again and looked directly at the Empress. "Mother, it's been so many years since we last met. This child is unfilial." As he spoke, he knelt down in front of the Empress. At this moment, everyone present seemed to have woken up from a dream and knelt down in front of the Crown Prince. The Empress' eyes were filled with hot tears as she personally helped him up and said in a choked voice, "It's good that you're back, it's good that you're back. Now that you're back, don't leave again." Gong Che also said with emotion, "I won't leave. In the future, this son will always serve mother and won't travel far." "Good, good." The Empress nodded repeatedly. Then she thought of something and asked, "Your Majesty, did you go?" Gong Che patted her hand and comforted her. "Mother, don't worry. Father knows." After comforting the Empress, he turned around. His black robes fluttered as he smiled at the crowd behind him. "Since it's a palace banquet, there's no need to be so courteous. Rise." His voice was still as gentle as before, but now, he was no longer the Crown Prince who was in a precarious position. "Thank you, Crown Prince." Only then did the crowd stand up. Many of the braver girls secretly peeked at Gong Che's face. With one look, they were stunned and envious of Su Miaolan's good luck. Gong Che's entire person was really different. It was as if a stone surface had been broken and a beautiful jade had been carved. His entire person's temperament seemed to have risen to another level, slowly revealing his inner beauty to the world. Her ink-black hair was only held up by a jade hairpin. She wore a black robe with a belt that was lightly tied up, making her appear slender and graceful. He was dressed very casually, but it didn't give people the feeling that his clothes were untidy. They only felt that his dressing was very suitable, and it gave people a feeling of extreme simplicity. His exquisite brows revealed some gentleness, and his entire being was like a gentle breeze, completely revealing his unique elegance. While everyone was looking at him, he was looking at Gong Yimo. At this moment, Gong Yimo stood up and smiled at him with a wine glass in her hand. "Brother Crown Prince, we meet again." When Gong Yimo smiled, that overbearing beauty was instantly diluted by an aura that encompassed all things. People could only marvel at her beauty and elegance, but did not feel threatened in the slightest. But at this moment, there was a trace of bitterness and sorrow in her smile. For a moment, she wished that they had never grown up. Gong Che was captivated by her smile, and his heart was once again filled with unbearable turbulence. His Moa had grown up, and it was just as he had expected. She was gorgeous, calm, and elegant. How regretful he was that he couldn't witness her growth, and how happy he was for her growth. Moa, his voice seemed to be on the tip of his tongue, and in that moment, it was so gentle that it seemed to have substance. But his fingers formed a deep imprint in his palm. He didn't show it on his face, but only the heavens knew how hard it was for him to endure. He took a deep breath, and after a while, he revealed a seemingly carefree smile. At this moment, he received a cup of wine from a servant and raised it to Gong Yimo. "After not seeing you for so many years, Moa has grown up." His eyelashes trembled, hiding the emotions in his eyes. He forced himself to look away. "When I was young, if I did anything wrong, I hope that Imperial Sister will be magnanimous enough to forgive me. This cup is a toast to you. Let everything in the past be in the past. Congratulations on your return." After he finished speaking, he raised his head and drank the wine. Gong Yimo was slightly startled, but after a while, she revealed a smile. It's good that Crown Prince Gidge has thought it through. A toast to you, welcome back to the capital. After saying that, she raised her head and drank the wine. When she raised her head, her snow-white neck rose, revealing her slightly moving throat. That was a gentle arc, and Gong Chei's gaze couldn't help but be deeply attracted by that touch of whiteness. His Adam's apple moved as if he was infatuated. His Moa she was so beautiful that it made him use all of his breath to restrain himself. The happiest person was the Empress. Chei finally thought it through. Was there anything more worthy of being happy than this? The successive surprises made her dizzy, to the extent that she didn't pay attention to some details, thinking that Gong Chei had really let it go. After Gong Yimo finished drinking the wine, she only felt her heart relax. Her mood gradually improved. She was originally distressed about how to face Gong Chei, but now that Gong Chei had thought it through himself, it was the best. Because Gong Chei was really a good brother, able to bring warmth to others, and she only needed such a brother. Thinking of this, her smile also became more sincere. From the moment she came in, the low pressure that had been pervading the air finally dispersed, and everyone inexplicably felt their hearts lighten. At this time, the hearts of the noble ladies who were jealous of Su Miaolan were sour, and someone suddenly said, "Your Highness the Crown Prince really came at the right time. Sister Su is about to perform a dance, it's our honor." When she opened her mouth, Su Miaolan's originally shy expression changed. If the people present were all noble ladies, her performance wouldn't be a problem. But now that the Crown Prince came, and behind him were some trusted aides, performing in front of so many people, how could she still keep her face? However, the other noble ladies didn't want to let her go. It's said that Sister Su's dancing skills are superb. Today, we're in for a treat. That's right, that's right. When the Crown Prince heard this, his interest was piqued, and he asked someone to set up a table beside Gong Yimo. Since it's like this one is really lucky. If it's amazing, this one will heavily reward you. That meant that he didn't mind Su Miaolan dancing in front of everyone. Moreover, his smile was magnanimous, and his whole person was like the warm sun, making people feel comfortable, without any intention of making things difficult. Many people couldn't help but think that the Crown Prince must have said this unintentionally, and definitely didn't understand the twists and turns of a woman. When the Empress saw this, she frowned and was about to speak, but Su Miaolan gently smiled. Since it's like this subject's daughter will embarrass herself. She gently smiled at Gong Chei, full of tenderness and expectation. In any case, she was going to marry the Crown Prince, so if she could better display herself in front of the Crown Prince, why not? When the other noble ladies saw that she agreed so quickly, they all scolded her in their hearts, but in the end, they were still envious of her being able to display herself in front of Gong Chei. Even if they wanted to, they didn't have the guts. Chapter 281. The music rose once again. Not knowing if it was an illusion, everyone felt that the music seemed to be more cheerful. It seemed that Gong Chei's return not only excited the Empress, he was also very popular. Everyone in the palace welcomed his return. Su Miaolan began to dance to the music. At this moment, she was incomparably glad that she knew how to dance. Because this was the only way she could show off her figure to her heart's content. From what she knew, Gong Chei was 21 years old. Not to mention concubines, he didn't even have a tong fang. It was very likely that he was still inexperienced. So she was very confident that as long as she entered the Crown Prince's palace and became the Crown Prince's first woman, the Crown Prince would definitely be deeply attracted to her. At that time, she would firmly grasp his heart and not give any other woman a chance. But how could she have known that Gong Chei was currently sitting beside Gong Yimo? The Empress, who was on the right, would occasionally pull him aside to say something and praise Su Miaolan's dance. As for Gong Chei, he was watching Su Miaolan's spinning figure. All his attention was on Gong Yimo, who was on his left. At this moment, he really wanted his Empress mother to stop talking to him. But he had just returned. In a moment of excitement, his Empress mother would definitely not let him off. But he also really wanted to talk to Mo. It had been 3 years. A year ago, he wasn't sure if that person was her or not. But now, She was really sitting on his left. It made him really want to hug her and kiss her. Gong Che once again lowered his eyelids. After such a long time, he finally discovered his own abnormality. Every time he thought of Mo his eyes would turn scarlet red. So now that he wanted to disguise himself, he couldn't let Mo find out. But he was very puzzled. Why did Mo seem to have known about it a long time ago when he only found out about it in the past few years? She really understood him very well. Thinking of this, he couldn't control the desire in his heart. He didn't even hear the Empress' voice. Che. The Empress looked at him strangely. Gong Che suddenly regained his senses and looked at the Empress. However, the Empress gave him a displeased look. Stunned. The Empress covered her mouth and laughed. Since you've been captivated by Miss Su's dance, then you have to fulfill your promise. If the reward is too little, Imperial Mother won't be satisfied. Hearing this, Su Miaolan shyly lowered her head. Just now, she had danced very seriously. She was confident that the Crown Prince's heart would be moved. God knows, Gong Che didn't notice what she was dancing at all. All his attention was firmly glued to Gong Yimo. Who knew that she would finish dancing so quickly? Gong Che smiled. He glanced at Gong Yimo from the corner of his eyes and saw that she seemed to be in a good mood. He could not help but sigh at this heartless little thing. Miss Su's dancing is indeed amazing. I'll give you a box of pearls, a natural jade pendant, and a pair of Southern Sea purple gold dangling ornaments. Oh right, I've recently obtained a pair of cloud orchid brocade. It's just right for Miss Su's outstanding charm. Not to mention how precious the things Gong Che casually mentioned were. Just the cloud orchid brocade was enough to make people gasp in amazement. Many of the noble women present revealed an envious expression. These women thought a little more. It was said that water could make money. It seemed that the Crown Prince had accumulated a lot of wealth through this canal. Thinking of this, they felt that the Crown Prince's position was stable. No matter if it was his bearing, appearance, or status, he was a rare good man in this world. As for the cloud orchid brocade, who didn't know that it was the third best brocade in the world? Only Yuheng had it. Moreover, it was only produced 100 bolts a year. In addition, the two countries had not officially announced the imperial edict for trade. Even if you had money, you couldn't buy it. Su Miaolan was pleasantly surprised. Her cheeks blushed and she quickly thanked him. At this time, the Empress said somewhat sourly, Ari, as expected, the son has grown up and can't be controlled by his mother. Che, your imperial mother doesn't even have clothes made of cloud orchid brocade. You're so biased. Hearing this, Su Miaolan quickly said, Your Highness's reward is too great. This subject's daughter doesn't dare to accept this cloud orchid brocade. Gong Che smiled. I said I'll reward you, so I'll reward you. You deserve it. As he spoke, he said to the Empress, Cloud orchid brocade is indeed valuable. However, this subject's son has a bolt of cloud orchid brocade. It's specially for Imperial Mother. His words made everyone even more surprised. If it was only 100 bolts of cloud orchid brocade a year, then it would be fine. However, cloud orchid brocade was even rarer. There were only 20 bolts a year. Even in the imperial harem of Yuheng, it was a great honor for the concubines to have a dress made of cloud orchid brocade. A woman smiled and said, Your Highness is really considerate. You can even obtain the second and third most valuable material in the world. It's a pity that we've only heard of its beauty but have never seen it. I wonder if we'll have the fortune to see it. Gong Che said gently, Madam, you're exaggerating. How can I be biased? Everyone present today will be rewarded. As soon as he said this, everyone knelt down in surprise. Thank you, Crown Prince, for your reward. It had to be said that Gong Che was really becoming more and more mature. When he returned this time, he specially brought these things that could please women so that the Empress could gain face. Didn't he see that the Empress was grinning from ear to ear? She was so happy that she suddenly saw Gong Yimo sitting alone at the side. Now that her son had let go of that obsession, she also found Gong Yimo pleasing to the eye. She hurriedly said, Che-ah, you haven't said what gift you brought for Mo-er. Everyone present was silent for a moment. They also wanted to know what Gong Che would give Gong Yimo. They wondered if it could be compared to the priceless Yun Jin. Gong Yimo also smiled and winked at Gong Che. That's right, Crown Prince Gij. If you give too little, I, your imperial sister, won't accept it. Her playful appearance was so cute that Gong Che almost couldn't control himself. He lowered his eyes and said in a low voice, Imperial sister's gift is naturally special. Later, I will personally give it to you. When he said this, because his eyes were lowered, he seemed a little cold. The Empress finally believed that Gong Che had really let go, so they ignored the word special. Gong Yimo didn't mind whether he was cold or not. She giggled and said, Then I, your imperial sister, will look forward to it. At this time, Su Miaolan also returned to her seat. She raised her head and puffed out her chest, feeling the envy from all directions. She became even more proud because this was the glory brought by her fiancé. However, she also regretted something. The reason why Gong Yimo had a special place in the Crown Prince's heart was because only Gong Yimo helped the Crown Prince during his most difficult time. Unfortunately, at that time, Gong Che almost lost his position as Crown Prince. So, whether it was her or her family, they didn't dare to step in and missed a good opportunity. Who knew that he would be able to make a comeback? As the saying goes, adding flowers to embroidery is not as good as providing charcoal in snowy weather. However, she was confident that as long as she became the Crown Prince's consort, she would definitely win back the Crown Prince's heart. She wouldn't give a single shred of it to others. After Su Miaolan's performance, the Empress arranged for singing and dancing. Today was a good day, so she couldn't help but drink a few more cups. After 30 cups of wine, Gong Che finally felt relieved when he saw that his mother didn't talk to him anymore. He mustered up his courage and said to Gong Yimo, It's been a few years since we last met. How has Imperial Sister been? Chapter 282. As he spoke, he quickly glanced at her and did not dare to look at her again. Under his sleeves, his hands were tightly clenched. Just being able to talk peacefully with her like this made him feel very satisfied. The suffering of these 3 years seemed to have been smoothed out, leaving behind only desire and anticipation. Gong Yimo heard this and smiled at him. She was happier than anyone that Gong Che could let go of her. Because of the grudges from her previous life, she was very familiar with Gong Dai. In the past few years, they had supported each other, so she was very close to him. However, it was impossible for her to fall in love with him. But to be able to live peacefully with Gong Che and have an older brother that she could rely on, this kind of feeling was very good. Crown Prince Gij, you're looking down on me too much. Which part of my life is not good? Although she had grown up and seemed to be more mature, when she was in a good mood, her lively eyes were like the sun in spring when she spoke, making everything around her full of vitality. At this time, she really did not suspect that Gong Che would pretend to let go. She was not a person who liked to be suspicious. Under normal circumstances, she also did not like to scheme against others. Therefore, she easily believed him. Gong Che saw that she was close to him again and he couldn't help but feel glad that he had chosen the right method. Thinking of this, his eyes became as gentle as water and he smiled as he talked about the topic that she was interested in. Now that Yuheng and Dai Yu State are about to open trade, there is no need to set up any more defenses along the waterway. Soon, we can openly do business. In the past, Gong Yimo had said that illegal immigration was only temporary. One day, she would open up trade between the 4 countries. He never thought that she would really do it, as a woman. This was something that Gong Che sincerely admired. Gong Yimo smiled with a bit of pride. Suddenly, she thought of something and looked at Gong Che with a bit of nervousness. Her eyebrows raised. My fleet has already taken shape. Even if we change from illegal immigration to official business, those waterways will still be mine. They will all be mine. She narrowed her eyes and stared at Gong Che. Brother Crown Prince, you already have control over most of the resources in the canal. You won't want to fight with me over these little streams, right? Her expression changed very quickly, and the way she clutched her pocket almost melted Gong Che's heart. He really wanted to tell her, it's yours, it's all yours, if you want, I can give you the whole Grand Canal, as long as you are mine. But he didn't dare. He was trapped in a cage and had gone crazy, but when he saw her pity, he would gladly endure it. As long as you want it, those are all yours. He seemed to have said these words with the tip of his tongue, and his tone was incomparably affectionate. However, he suddenly realized something. Afraid that Gong Yimo would be alerted, he quickly said, "After all, it's all thanks to you that I'm where I am now." Gong Yimo's eyes curved into crescents. She loved to hear people thank her and praise her. "Then, you have to return the shipyard at Hongzhehu to me." "All right. I also want to open a shipyard in the Huai River. It's all up to you." Gong Yimo really wanted to cheer. She felt that her obedient big brother crown prince had returned. That doting gaze was simply too obvious. "Many thanks, big brother crown prince," she happily said. Suddenly, she thought of something and pretended to dig around in her sleeves. After a while, she pulled out a small cloth bag and said in a very forthright manner, "Since big brother crown prince is so generous, this imperial sister also can't be stingy. Here, I'll give this good thing to you." Gong Che curiously received it. When he opened it, he discovered that there were more than 10 stalks of perfectly preserved herbs. This is. At this time, he still didn't know the use of the water cloud grass, so he didn't recognize it. Gong Yimo mysteriously moved closer and said, "This matter was no small matter, so it couldn't be heard by others." Her warm breath blew into Gong Che's ear, causing him to stiffen abruptly, not daring to move an inch. "Big brother crown prince, according to reliable news, your congenital heart disease isn't incurable. And this water cloud grass is the key. Why don't you let your secret doctor do a thorough research on this? I hope you can recover soon." This step was 5 years earlier than in his previous life. Gong Che never thought that his heart disease, which he had to constantly take medicine to prevent others from knowing about, could actually be cured. At this moment, his heart was thumping. He didn't know if it was because of this great news or because of Gong Yimo's alluring body fragrance. Gong Yimo smiled proudly. "There's no need to thank me. When you're really well, then you can thank me." When she said this, her lips accidentally brushed against his earlobe. Gong Che only felt that his heart disease seemed to have suddenly relapsed. At this moment, he actually felt that her existence made it difficult for him to breathe. Gong Yimo smiled as she retreated and even patted his back. Seeing Gong Che's stunned expression, she thought that he was stunned by this great news. When she retreated, although Gong Che felt that he could breathe again, it was as if a piece of his heart was suddenly missing. He really couldn't accept that she had suddenly distanced herself from him. The Empress didn't think much of their close interaction, but Su Miaolan felt very uncomfortable. Gong Yimo was beautiful and Gong Che was also very gentle and handsome. Looking at them, it seemed like they were a pair. This point almost made her tear the handkerchief in her hand. Wasn't it just helping the Crown Prince once in a time of danger? Wasn't it just protecting the Crown Prince on the boat back to the capital when he was injured? Whether or not it was because she had a powerful weapon on her that dragged the Crown Prince down was another matter. What was so great about a woman appearing in public? But what right did she have to be so close to the Crown Prince? And she, the future Crown Princess, had to sit in front of them. At this time, Gong Che finally recovered his state of mind. As long as he thought about how Gong Yimo had placed his illness in her heart, found a way to treat it, and even carried the key medicine with her every day, he couldn't help but feel a surge in his heart that was hard to suppress. He was different to Mo-er. No matter if it was based on familial affection or love, as long as he was different, it made him very excited. He wished he could hug her, kiss her, and thank her. No. He couldn't think about it. He couldn't think about it. As long as he thought about the day when he could hug Gong Yimo and kiss her wantonly, his heart would tremble. It was as if his entire body was covered in thorns. Only by being close to her could he be saved. But he didn't dare to approach her. After thinking for a while, he could only reach out and pat her head. "Thank you, Mo-er." Gong Yimo felt that she had put down the heavy matter in her heart and returned his smile. This medicine was originally because she felt that she couldn't respond to him, so she specially went to pick it as compensation for him. But now, since Gong Che had put it down himself, then she had no more obstacles in her heart. She directly gave it to him, hoping that he would get better soon. The interaction between the two made Su Miaolan unable to continue watching, and she suddenly stood up. Chapter 283. Everyone's gaze gathered on her body. Even the Empress was curious. What's wrong? Su Miaolan wasn't being impulsive. She was really prepared. Your Highness, she bowed towards Gong Che. Gong Che's doting smile disappeared and he looked at her strangely. He must have forgotten that Su Miaolan was his fiancée. Su Miaolan shyly smiled and took out an item from her bosom. This subject also has something to give to your Highness. I hope your Highness won't reject it. Gong Che's smile froze for a moment. Many noble ladies felt that Su Miaolan's action was inappropriate. However, she was the future crown princess. If the crown prince didn't say anything, they couldn't say anything in public. The Empress was stunned for a moment before she smiled and said, "You're so considerate. Let me see what it is." Su Miaolan shyly looked at Gong Che and then handed over the item in her hand. This is. The Empress looked at it with surprise. She found that it was a very delicate pouch with intertwined twigs embroidered on it. Strangely, when it was exposed to light, the intertwined twigs seemed to bloom. However, when it was placed in the dark, it didn't bloom. It was really exquisite. This made her forget how ambiguous the intertwined twigs were. She passed it down and let the other madams see it. Everyone noticed this point, and for a moment, they were full of praises. Gong Yimo was curious. When she took it and saw it, she almost spat it out. What's wrong? Gong Che was very nervous about her every move. He asked and took it for a look. At this moment, Su Miaolan bowed and said, "This subject was handmade by myself. It was placed in front of the Buddha for 49 days. Now, I'm giving it to your Highness. I hope your Highness won't reject it." At this moment, Gong Che suddenly felt that the pouch in his hand was very hot. Especially when Moa saw the pattern of the twin flowers. Gong Yimo held back her laughter painfully, because this embroidery was obviously the work of Yu Qi, the god of embroidery. That girl had yet to truly rise up, so it was very rare for Su Miaolan to be able to get her embroidery. But now, in order to prove herself, she actually said that she embroidered it herself. Wasn't she afraid of being slapped in the face in the future? But when she thought about it, even if she was exposed in the future, she could say that she was the disciple of the other party. Presumably, with her status as the crown prince consort, that clever woman wouldn't mind having a disciple like her. Before Gong Che could say anything, the Empress laughed. "I've long heard that Miss Su's embroidery skills are excellent. How thoughtful of you. Che, why don't you accept it?" She glared at Gong Che, hinting for Gong Che to accept it, lest the girl be put on the spot. Gong Che forced a smile. "In that case, thank you, Miss Su." Su Miaolan was very happy to be in the limelight again. She raised her head and smiled generously. "This is what I should do." When she said this, she glanced at Gong Yimo very proudly and blurted out, "I only hope that it can accompany your Highness at all times. You might as well directly say that you want to accompany the crown prince at all times." Many noble ladies thought of this at the same time and despised Su Miaolan's boldness. Gong Yimo felt her teeth ache. Just how much did she want to get married? Well, after Gong Che rose to power in her previous life, Su Miaolan also yearned to marry him. In this life, Gong Che was younger than in her previous life and was even more glorious. It was inevitable that she would hold on to him so tightly and impatiently. Not to mention Gong Yimo, even Gong Che felt that Su Miaolan's words were too bold. He suddenly spoke with a serious expression. "This prince will accept the pouch, but Miss Su, please be careful with your words." If he didn't mention this matter, no one would say anything. But his words were like a public slap to Su Miaolan's face. Even if he was telling the truth, this kind of occasion made people embarrassed for no reason. At that moment, Su Miaolan seemed to hear other people's low sneers. Just when she was embarrassed and didn't know what to do, a eunuch announced, "Prince Qi has arrived, Prince Qi." Many noble ladies' eyes lit up, but the noble ladies were both expectant and afraid. When Gong Ju revealed his claws and teeth on the heavens platform that day, they only felt that he was majestic. But with a few words, he tore apart 4 families. In particular, Former friends were sent to the educational division. They admired Gongju's appearance and domineering aura, but at the same time, they were terrified of his ruthlessness and mercilessness. But no matter what they thought, Gong Dai only came to find the royal sister. Gong Che was too dangerous, so when he received the news that Gong Che returned to the capital, he immediately rushed back from the suburbs. He wouldn't give Gong Che any chance. When Gong Che heard that Gong Dai came, his smile froze. Wasn't he training the imperial guards in the wilderness? How did he get the news so quickly? Gong Yimo was happy at first, but then she remembered the emperor's words. Her smile sank and she snorted. When Gong Dai came, he first looked at Gong Yimo and then bowed to the empress. When he saw Gong Che, he was not surprised. He also bowed very coldly and then pulled Gong Yimo to leave. At this time, Gong Che suddenly stood up and subconsciously pulled Gong Yimo's other hand. He looked at Gong Dai with naked coldness. What do you want to do? Gong Dai's eyes suddenly turned cold. His gaze fell on Gong Che's hand and he narrowed his eyes. Imperial father ordered an important matter, but he needs the royal sister's help. Imperial brother, do you have any objections? Gong Yimo also looked at Gong Che strangely. Gong Che seemed to wake up from a dream and let go of her hand reluctantly. You shouldn't be in such a hurry. It's almost time for the banquet. I'm really sorry. Imperial father's orders can't be delayed. Gong Che couldn't help but mock. What, without Mo you can't complete Imperial father's task? Yes. Gong Dai answered without hesitation, which directly made Gong Che speechless. At this moment, the two people's gazes collided and seemed to create sparks. The atmosphere at the scene became tense. The Empress' expression also became serious and she didn't say anything. After taking a deep breath, Gong Che finally calmed himself down. With so many people present, he really couldn't be too entangled, so Gong Dai sneered and took Gong Yimo away, completely ignoring the strange looks from the people present. Gong Che watched as Gong Yimo was dragged away, but he didn't have the right to make her stay. This feeling of helplessness made him want to kill someone for the first time in his life. Gong Dai. Gong Yimo was pulled along by Gong Dai and was a little confused. Gong Dai, where are you taking me? When she asked this, the two had already walked into a garden. Gong Dai suddenly stopped, causing her to almost bump into him. At this moment, he turned around and looked deeply at the person in front of him. His expression was complicated as he asked in a low voice. Royal sister, I heard that Imperial father is looking for you for an urgent matter today. What is the reason? At the mention of this matter, Gong Yimo was a little unhappy. She shook off Gong Dai's hand and said indifferently, You're hurting me. Gong Dai saw that her mood had suddenly sunk and smiled instead as he asked softly, Imperial father wants you to persuade me to get married? Gong Yimo glared at him. Since you already know, why are you still asking? Gong Dai looked at her. For some reason, his ink-black eyes suddenly revealed a trace of affection and his tone also became gentle. It's nothing. I just want to know, when Imperial father wants you to do this, are you happy or sad? Gong Yimo was stunned. She didn't expect Gong Dai to ask this. He continued to ask, not allowing her to dodge at all. Are you happy that you can finally shake me off, or are you a little sad in your heart? Chapter 284. Happy or sad? Gong Yimo was stumped by this question, and it was a question she did not want to answer. So she turned to leave, but Gong Dai pulled her back tightly. Royal sister, as long as you answer my question, I'll let you go. Gong Yimo was a little annoyed, and she flung his hand away. What's there to be happy about? Imperial father just wanted me to pass on a message, nothing else. Gong Dai stared into her eyes. Then what do you want to tell me? Why not? Gong Yimo did not dare to look at him, and she turned to look at the withered leaves. Little Princess Lu Yi is beautiful and has a good temperament. She's good enough for you. Are these your heartfelt words? Gong Dai stood there and raised his eyebrows slightly. His black brocade robe set off his fair face, and at this moment, his clear eyes were staring coldly at her, making her feel even more pressured with every word she said. Millimeter, I'm serious. She gritted her teeth and nodded. Anyway, But in the next second, Her lips were locked by Gong Ju. She widened her eyes and pushed him away. Gong Dai. She looked around, and when she saw that there was no one around, she heaved a sigh of relief. She glared fiercely at Gong Dai. Are you crazy? This is the palace, not the bedchamber. Royal sister, do you mean that it's fine if we're in the bedchamber? He hooked a strand of Gong Yimo's hair and asked with a chuckle. Gong Yimo's face flushed red, and she said angrily, it's not fine even if we're in the bedchamber. Royal sister hasn't answered my question. Why is he still asking that question? Gong Yimo exploded. I don't mind. You can marry whoever you want, it's fine. Once she finished speaking, Gong Dai hooked his arm around the back of her head again, and domineeringly lowered his head to kiss her little mouth. You. Gong Yimo tried to break free, but she couldn't. Her entire body tensed up, afraid that someone would see it. Finally, she turned her head with great effort. Gong Dai was still kissing her earlobe and neck. Let me go. Are you crazy? Gong Dai stopped and hugged her. He chuckled, but there was a fire burning in the depths of his eyes. I'm not crazy. It's just that royal sister is too naughty. I have to teach her a lesson, he asked again with a smirk. Are you really not sad? I'm not sad. I am very happy. However, Gong Dai blocked her words with a kiss. The two of them did it in the palace as if no one else was around. If someone saw this, would Gong Dai really not care about the consequences? Aren't you sad? He interrogated her again and again. I'm happy. Oh. Really? Oh. Being kissed time and time again, Gong Yimo's heart was filled with anger. Gong Dai was simply playing with fire, but I'm very sad. Suddenly, his low voice entered her ears, causing her to almost lose her mind. She looked up. Gong Dai's devilish face was close to hers. He was originally cold, noble, and arrogant, but now, the sadness in his eyes was so obvious. When I knew that you promised Imperial Father to persuade me to get married, this place was very painful. It was as if you had stabbed me with a knife. He pinched Gong Yimo's hand and poked his heart. His voice was still very calm, but every word was filled with sorrow. In the end, it was almost inaudible. That's why I want to know if you're sad or not. If you're sad, I think I can recover without medicine. He smiled bitterly, but if you're not sad, if you're happy. He paused for a while before saying the second half of the sentence. If you're happy, there's no other way. Because I will still pester you until the day you die. Gong Yimo was stunned. Being forced by him, hearing him say such words, she was really at a loss. Now, tell me, are you happy or sad? I'm happy. She thought that she could easily say these few words, but when she looked into his eyes, she found that her lips seemed to be stuck by something, and she couldn't say a word. Her hesitation made Gong Dai's eyes light up. Royal sister, do you like me? I don't. Gong Yimo quickly refuted, but Gong Dai hugged her in his arms. It's okay. It's okay if you don't like me. Because whether you like me or not, you're still my person. I'm just very happy that you're hesitating. Today, you're sad because of Imperial Father's words, right? Gong Yimo wanted to say no, but she couldn't say it. She could only remain silent. Gong Dai was even happier. Royal sister, I'm really sorry that Imperial Father made you sad. But I won't. As he spoke, he was moved to kiss her lips. Gong Yimo nervously dodged a few times, but in the end, she couldn't dodge and was kissed by him. The two bodies were leaning against each other, so harmonious, tight, and intimate that an outsider couldn't get in. Gong Chei's fingers dug deep into the bark of the tree. From afar, he stood behind the tree, looking at them with a gloomy expression. He was really unwilling to let Gong Yimo be taken away by Gong Dai like this, so he found an opportunity to come out. He didn't expect to see this scene with his own eyes in this secluded garden. He never had the chance to kiss her like this. He also never hugged her like this, so why could Gong Dai do it? Why? His heart felt like it was being torn apart. This feeling was so similar to when Gong Yimo wished him to have a child soon. Gong Chei's eyes gradually turned red. He really wanted to separate the two of them. He wanted to ask Gong Yimo why she resisted him, but she couldn't reject Gong Dai. How was he inferior to Gong Dai? How was he inferior to Gong Dai? In terms of kinship, Gong Dai was her little brother that she raised. If he couldn't, then could Gong Dai. He really wanted to rush out, kill that man. As long as Gong Dai was dead, no one would come to steal his treasure. When he became the emperor, Moa would be his empress. They could be very loving and happy. But Gong Dai actually wanted to steal his treasure. That was his. The sharp barbs on the bark pierced his fingertips, causing them to bleed, but Gong Che didn't feel it. His knuckles were pale, and it was obvious that he was still exerting force. He couldn't go out. He even had to pretend that he didn't see it. He couldn't go out, he couldn't. This anger, pain, and helplessness, it made him want to tear the whole world apart. He wanted everyone to die, and only the two of them were left. Gong Yimo couldn't take it anymore. Could Gong Dai not care about her? This was the imperial palace. She struggled again. This time, Gong Dai wasn't angry. Instead, he smiled faintly. "Royal sister, don't be angry," Gong Yimo glared at him. She didn't want to bother with him. "Royal sister, I promise that I won't marry anyone except you." Gong Yimo immediately stomped her feet. "It's not like I don't want you to marry me. It's up to you whether you want to marry me or not." After saying that fiercely, she ran away. She didn't want to be entangled with Gong Dai anymore. Gong Dai was like a gangster now, taking advantage of her at every turn. After Gong Yimo left, Gong Dai seemed to sense something and turned around. At this time, Gong Che was completely hidden behind a tree. A corner of his black robe was revealed, and Gong Dai smiled cruelly. Chapter 285. Was it painful? Was it uncomfortable? He had to let Gong Che know who had the rights to ownership. Therefore, he didn't mind letting Gong Che take a good look and recognize the truth. After he left, Gong Che leaned against a tree and slowly squatted down. At this moment, his face was flushed and he seemed to be out of breath. His hands trembled as he took out a jade bottle and poured out a pill. However, it took him a few tries before he managed to stuff it into his mouth. He bit down on his lower lip and didn't make a sound. He allowed the bitter taste to spread in his mouth. However, this bitterness was nothing compared to the bitterness in his heart. He was so angry, so hateful, so resentful, and so painful. Moa clearly treated him differently. Without Gong Dai, Moa definitely wouldn't reject him. If she could accept Gong Dai, then she could definitely accept him. Therefore, it was good that Gong Dai was dead. It was good that he was dead. "Moa," Gong Che closed his eyes in defeat. "Even in my dreams, I want you to kiss me. Even in my dreams." The next few days were very peaceful. In any case, she had already delivered the message. She didn't care about Gong Dai's reaction. Yes, she didn't need to care. On this day, Gong Yimo was reading in her room. Regarding Lu Yi and Yu Heng wanting to build a passage for horses, she vaguely had a plan in mind. If she could convince Dai Yu State, Yu Heng, and Lu Yi to open a passage that would connect the three countries directly, then along the way, she could build a horse ranch at intervals. She didn't know if it would be possible for the ranches of the three countries to reach a unified agreement for transportation. This way, it would be like a relay station and they could transfer between stations midway. For example, if Dai Yu State wanted to ship goods to Lu Yi, they would entrust the horse farms of the three kingdoms to do so. Then, from the start of the shipment to Lu Yi, they would have to pass through more than a dozen horse farms. Every time they arrived at a horse farm, they would have to change horses to transport the goods. This way, the speed would be much faster and the horses would have a chance to rest. In addition, there were merchants coming and going from the south to the north. If a horse went to Lu Yi, it would be brought back by Lu Yi's merchants. Because of this, the number of horses in each horse farm would be maintained at a balanced number. On the other hand, merchants only needed to bear the cost of transportation, greatly reducing the cost and risk. After all, this horse farm belonged to the country. Even if there were bandits, the horse farms could still help each other. Moreover, if there was nothing to do on a normal day, the horse farm could also be used as a place to produce horses and practice riding and shooting. When the merchants walked to the next horse farm, they could also directly rest at the horse farm's relay station. They did not need to sleep in the wilderness. If one really wanted to describe it, it would probably be a product of combining escort agencies, relay stations, and logistics companies in the future. However, it could include basic necessities such as food, clothing, housing, and transportation. This would create a lot of benefits and convenience. This way, not only would it promote prosperity, but more importantly, it would maintain the three kingdoms on a win-win boat. Once there were frequent exchanges between citizens and countries, and even intermarriage, then in the future, even if a country's ruler became muddle-headed and wanted to go to war, he would not be able to do so because the citizens would not agree. After all, when the citizens were rich, the rulers could only restrain their ambitions. This was because other than their ambitions, they also had an important iron law and mission, and that was to make the country rich. If the four countries were side by side, everyone would feel happy and the country would be able to develop at any time. Then, what kind of impact would an ambitious emperor bring? Gong Yimo laughed. This sudden idea was not bad. After all, she did not have the idea of annexing the four countries and unifying the Central Plains. Now that communication was not developed, the consequence of a superpower existing was that it would not be easy to control. Many local officials would become arrogant, and they could even seal the city gates and become the local emperor without letting the real emperor know. Therefore, there were also benefits to the coexistence of the four countries. Also, between countries, they could improve together by comparing with each other. When the territory was small, it would be easier to govern and there would not be any blind spots. Once there was any reform, the four countries would work together and it would be much easier to do anything. Most importantly, when the wealth was balanced, peace would be achieved and there would be no wars. Of course, to achieve this goal, there was still a lot to do. Then, the only problem now was, how would she convince Emperor Lu Yi? Because once it involved the horse farm, Lu Yi would definitely contribute the most. However, looking at the situation of the barren land, Lu Yi would also be the one who would gain the most. It was just that she did not know if Longcheng Wuji had the courage to do so. She was not worried about Yuheng. According to reliable sources, Jin Sheng was about to die of illness. Yuheng had become Kim Yun's sole authority. Moreover, it was said that he would soon come to Dayu State to discuss the period of trade between the two countries. When the time came, it would not be a big problem to mention it to him. As she was thinking and writing, unknowingly, an entire morning had passed. She also put down her pen and stretched her fingers. This matter was very important. There were many details, management, regulations, responsibilities, etc. She was just thinking about it. After all, she had promised Longcheng Wuji last time that she would give him a good idea. With a bellyful of thoughts, Gong Yimo wanted to discuss with the emperor. Therefore, she carried a pile of documents and walked towards the imperial study. Now that Gong Yimo's status was high, she had the privilege of entering the imperial study without needing to report. However, when she walked in, she was informed by the palace servants that the emperor had gone to inspect the imperial army's drill and would be back later. Look, even the crown prince was waiting in the imperial study. Hearing that Gong Che was there, Gong Yimo was a little conflicted. Although Gong Che had said that it was all in the past, it was still a little awkward to suddenly meet him. However, she thought about it again. She could not delay the important matter because of this awkwardness. If Gong Che knew that she had come but did not enter, he might think too much. Therefore, she directly walked in. At this time, there were no palace servants in the imperial study. There was only Gong Che. When Gong Yimo entered, he was looking up at a famous painting. However, his expression was bleak, as if there was something very heavy on his mind. It should not be. Gong Che was in high spirits now. Why would he have such an expression? Hearing the movement, Gong Che thought that the emperor had come. However, when he turned around and saw that it was Gong Yimo, he was stunned on the spot. His expression was complicated. Brother Crown Prince. Gong Yimo smiled as she walked closer. She threw the things in her hands on the dragon table and blinked to greet him. What have you been busy with these few days? You've been very secretive. She was just saying that. Unexpectedly, Gong Che suddenly said, "Then do you want to see me?" His words stunned Gong Yimo. Before she could understand what he meant, Gong Che reached out and patted her head. What I mean is, even if you wanted to see me, I didn't see you coming to find me. It seems that after being separated for so long, we have become estranged. When he said that, his expression became even more desolate. Gong Yimo quickly shook her head. How is that possible? Brother Crown Prince has always been Brother Crown Prince. There is no estrangement. Gong Che smiled. She did not know if it was Gong Yimo's illusion, but she felt that Gong Che seemed to be different in some way. However, she could not tell what was different. Chapter 286. Moa, the last time you gave me the herb, I let the doctor take a look at it and he said that it's very effective for my illness. He hid the turbulent emotions in his eyes and took a step closer to Gong Yimo, smiling gently. He also said that the herb is very precious and it's priceless. All of this is thanks to you, royal sister. Gong Yimo waved her hand, wanting to say that it's all right, it's just a small matter. However, she suddenly thought of something and laughed, revealing her white teeth. Then shouldn't Brother Crown Prince thank me? What do you want? What do you mean what I want? Brother Crown Prince, did you forget that you said you brought me a present? Where's the present? She poked his chest fiercely with her index finger. Gong Che strangely held her hand and looked up at her. How about I give you all of me? His Adam's apple bobbed. What I give you will naturally be the best. As he spoke, he lowered his head and whispered something in her ear. Gong Yimo's eyes lit up when she heard it. Are you serious? She was so surprised by his words that she completely forgot how close he was at this moment. Of course. Gong Che lowered his eyes, the sweet scent of her body clearly enveloping him, making him take a deep breath. Needless to say, his eyes must have turned red at this moment, deeply, longing for her color. That's great. Gong Yimo looked up and thanked him excitedly. Brother Crown Prince is so considerate. Since you're the one who discovered this coal mine, you'll definitely benefit from it in the future. I don't want those benefits. Money. He really had too much right now. Then what do you want? Gong Yimo's thoughts were now on the coal mine. She didn't expect that Gong Che really took her words to heart. When he was digging a tributary, he discovered the coal mine and protected it, only telling her about it. Looking at her obviously distracted little face, Gong Che couldn't help but think about how Gong Dai had kissed her that day. He also wanted to try. What do I want? I only want you. At this moment, the Emperor walked in with a big smile on his face. I heard that Moa is here. Then it must be something good. When Gong Yimo heard this, she quickly turned around and ran over. However, Gong Che remained in the same spot with an inexplicable expression. The moment Gong Cheng entered, he saw the casually dressed Gong Yimo and frowned slightly. Moa, it's not that we want to criticize you, but you're already so old and have such a noble status. How can you not pay attention to your image at all? Gong Yimo's hair was tied up in a ponytail. She was wearing a modified light yellow cross-collar robe and a light green floral skirt. She looked good in everything, especially this kind of extremely simple style, which could accentuate her temperament and appearance. However, as a noble princess, it was a bit inappropriate to dress too simply. Gong Yimo was not convinced. She spun around, and her skirt fluttered in the wind. The layers of embroidery seemed to come alive, and her smile was like a flower. What's wrong with it? Crown Prince Gidge, don't you think it looks good? Gong Che subconsciously said. Imperial sister looks good in everything. Gong Yimo proudly snorted at the Emperor. However, the Emperor glared at Gong Che. Look at how spoiled you guys are. I'm afraid she'll become undisciplined and out of control in the future. Gong Che laughed. He wanted to spoil her and indulge her in everything she did. All right, Moa, Che, why are you looking for us? Gong Che said, it's about the Grand Canal's conferring ceremony. This matter still needs Imperial Father to personally handle. Gong Cheng suddenly remembered that Gong Che's return meant that the Grand Canal had been completely repaired. They were going to hold the conferring ceremony and worship the heavens and earth. This was indeed a big matter. He nodded. We know. Tomorrow, we will discuss this matter with the officials. You can submit the memorial during the morning court. With that, he looked at Gong Yimo again. Girl, what kind of wicked idea did you come up with? Gong Yimo smiled and quickly showed the results of the morning to Gong Cheng. Imperial Father, this son's good news is not worse than the conferring ceremony. If this matter is done well, I guarantee that Imperial Father's good name will definitely be passed down through the ages. You will be greatly praised by future generations. Gong Cheng was amused by her and laughed. Tell me, what good news did you come up with? Gong Yimo hurriedly told the emperor her thoughts, including which relay stations would be convenient to convert into horse farms, including improving the carriage and production, as well as the benefits, cost, impact, and so on. Moreover, she did not guard against Gong Che at all. In any case, as the future emperor of a country, he would have to come into contact with these things. The more Gong Cheng and Gong Che listened, the more they felt that it was wonderful. Gong Cheng's expression became more and more calm. Obviously, he was thinking, while Gong Che's mind gradually wandered off. He looked at Gong Yimo's small mouth that opened and closed. When she talked about the construction plan, her lively eyes and expression were soaring. She had astonishing talent, but she also knew when to yield and when to stand tall. Her attitude was humble. She was like a sponge. Sometimes, when Gong Cheng said a few words to the point, she would quickly write it down. It could be seen that when she did things, she was modest and calm. She did not hide anything and was willing to casually speak out such a wonderful idea for everyone to discuss, instead of monopolizing the credit for fear that others would interfere. She also did not like to take credit. Whether it was the West Continent, the canal, or the bank, she just did it. She never cared about the results she had already achieved, as if the past was the past and was not worth mentioning. However, there were always countless wonderful ideas in her mind, which made people deeply attracted to her and could only be attracted to her. Gong Che asked himself, there would not be another woman as special as her in this world. If she could not belong to him, then why did God let him meet her? Your idea is very good. After Gong Cheng carefully pondered, his eyes lit up. However, just as Gong Yimo thought, there were many difficulties to overcome. Although he was very moved, he only praised her verbally. In that case, the heavy burden of persuading King Lu Yi and second Prince Yuheng will be handed to you. Don't let Zhen down. Gong Yimo's small face fell, and she wailed, Imperial Father, it's not fair. I'm the one who came up with the idea, but I'm also the one who put in the effort. Gong Cheng was amused by her small appearance and raised his thick eyebrows. There's no other way. The capable do more work. Zhen really couldn't find anyone else suitable to do this matter, so it's only you. Gong Yimo pouted and poked Gong Che, who was still in a daze. Gij Crown Prince, Imperial Father is bullying me again. Quickly stop him. Her eyes were watery and she looked very wronged, making Gong Che's heart have an impulse to solve all of her unwillingness. Gong Cheng smiled, it's no use even if you look for him. This matter is settled. When we send Princess Lu Yi's envoy back, Zhen will send you out to discuss important matters. Hearing that Gong Yimo was leaving, Gong Che frowned. Imperial Father, Mo is a woman, I'm afraid it's not appropriate. If it's another woman, then it's fine. Gong Cheng looked at Gong Yimo very proudly. But Mo, her ability is more outstanding than any of your brothers. Of course, Che, Zhen is not saying that you're not outstanding, but don't be jealous of Mo. Haha. When he said this, it was obvious that he had already made up his mind. Moreover, Gong Che thought that this was also good. If he could let Gong Dai marry Princess Lu Yi while Mo was away, then when Mo returned, Gong Dai would definitely give up on Gong Dai. Therefore, after saying this, he didn't speak anymore. Later, when Gong Dai found out about this matter, he felt that the emperor did it on purpose. He purposely sent the royal sister away, and he had already made up his mind. No matter what others said, he wouldn't relent. Chapter 287. The weather was getting colder and colder. Every household was decorated with lanterns and decorations. At this time, Yuheng's people were actually coming. This made Emperor Gong very surprised. He originally thought that Yuheng's turmoil had just subsided. Even if Kim Yoon wanted to visit, it should be after the new year. However, he came in such a hurry. It was obvious that he attached great importance to the trade between Yuheng and Dai Yu State, Therefore, when Emperor Gong received the news, he spent 3 days arranging the palace banquet to welcome Yuheng and the others. On this day, it was snowing lightly. However, the entire capital was bustling with noise and excitement. A very luxurious carriage slowly drove into the city. If Gong Yimo was here, she would definitely say that this was the correct way for a monarch to visit. Last time, she forced Longcheng Wuji to appear in a low-key and hurried manner. When she went back and thought about it, she would definitely be furious. The city gates were wide open. In addition to the 24 carriages at the front, there were many people following behind. Each of them had outstanding looks. They were wearing luxurious robes and carrying swords. They sat high on the backs of horses. Obviously, they were Kim Yoon's personal attendants. And behind them, there were a total of 129 congratulatory gifts. Each of them was covered with red cloth, forming a long line. At this time, the people suddenly realize their emperor's birthday was coming soon. When the emperor heard that Kim Yoon had gathered such a large number of people, he was a little surprised. Then, he revealed a smile. After all, being respected by the prince of a neighboring country made him proud. He also felt that Kim Yoon must be a humble and courteous person. Because before, it was only a verbal discussion. This time, the meeting represented the real finalization of the cooperation. Therefore, Emperor Gong made a sufficient gesture. He personally led the officials in front of the palace gates to welcome Kim Yoon's arrival. It could be said that he was expressing a grand welcome for Kim Yoon's arrival. At this time, Gong Yimo was in the palace being urged by the palace servants to dress up. Tonight, Emperor Gong would not allow her to be so casual. Gong Che, and the others were in front of the palace gates, standing beside the emperor. At this moment, they watched as Kim Yoon walked down the carriage step by step. Kim Yoon was famous for his good looks. Back then, when he was the #1 beauty in the world, he had to put on makeup and trim his eyebrows. But now, he had power, money, and status in his hands. It could be said that he was only one step away from ascending to the top. Therefore, he was completely different from before, but he was even more outstanding. His sword-like eyebrows reached his temples, and his red lips were bloodthirsty. The magnanimous calmness between his brows made Kim Yoon's appearance even more dazzling. From the moment he stepped down from the carriage, he had firmly grasped everyone's gaze. Gong Cheng was also stunned by the man in front of him. He secretly thought that in terms of appearance, there were many outstanding sons among his sons. At this time, he couldn't help but sigh. After all, this was the world of the young. King Lu Yi had succeeded in his rebellion, the Yuheng monarch had also fallen, and Empress Dowager Yuqi seemed to be having a hard time. Once these young people rose up, they would be unstoppable. Dai Yu State's monarch greets you. Kim Yoon took the first step to salute. Gong Cheng laughed heartily and helped her up. Why are you acting so distant? Now that the cooperation between the two countries is imminent, if you don't mind, you can call me uncle. I am a few years older than you, so I will call you nephew. His words showed great enthusiasm to Kim Yoon. Kim Yoon slightly hooked his lips and gladly accepted. Thank you, uncle. The two looked at each other and smiled. Kim Yoon was personally led into the imperial palace by Gong Cheng. Together, they sat in the imperial carriage and walked towards the main palace. Along the way, they were majestic, but they didn't make much noise. Kim Yoon saw this and had a clear understanding of Dai Yu State's prosperity and the strictness of the system. This was the country where Mo was from. He couldn't help but smile. Gong Cheng thought that he was admiring the exquisite atmosphere of Dai Yu State's imperial palace and didn't know that the other party was peeping at his daughter. The palace banquet was completely prepared. When everyone took their seats, the grand and complicated morning music sounded. It was auspicious and luxurious, as if a corner of the golden age had been lifted at this moment. The officials had already arrived. On such a day, they were allowed to bring their families, but they could only sit behind the curtains on both sides. There were 2 rows of seats set up. Of the women present, except for the empress and the 2 concubines, the other women, including the princess, couldn't show their faces. Of course, Gong Yimo was an exception. At the banquet, her seat was set between the crown prince and Gong Dai, representing her status. Now, only 2 people had not arrived. The one who dared to make the emperor and the prince of the neighboring country wait was the Empress Dowager, who claimed to be ill after the princess was restored and didn't dare to appear again. The other one was the Princess of Jiyu State, who had once stirred up a storm in Yuheng and returned to Daiyu State and successfully restored her position, Feng Guerong. Gong Dai looked at Kim Yoon, who was sitting on the left side of the emperor, and slightly narrowed his eyes. It was this person who was lucky enough to monopolize the royal sister for nearly 3 years. The banquet was about to begin. At this time, everyone was looking forward to it. For some reason, they wanted to know what would happen when Gong Yimo appeared in front of Kim Yoon again. Those who knew the inside story of Gong Yimo leaving Yuheng smiled and didn't say anything. However, those who didn't know thought that they could watch a good show. Feng Guerong, the princess of Jiyu State, has arrived. There was a moment of silence. Everyone, including Gong Dai, noticed that the prince of the neighboring country almost hurriedly interrupted his conversation with the emperor and turned his head to look at the door. His action made Gong Cheng smile meaningfully. It seemed that he was thinking too much. During those years when Mo was in Yuheng, it was likely that the Prince of Xiong had a dream, but the goddess didn't have a heart. He couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. If a family had a daughter, hundreds of families would want to marry them. His daughter was so outstanding, he was afraid that there would be more people who would want to marry her in the future. Unfortunately, Gong Yimo had already vowed not to marry for the rest of her life. Gong Yimo strode in. For such a formal occasion, she had to wear her court attire. This court attire was specially made later. There were a total of 12 layers, and the main colors were red and black. This was because the emperor found that these 2 colors could best highlight Gong Yimo's bearing. Just like that day at the heaven-seeking platform, she only wore a red dress and a black collar, but she was already better than countless women in the world. Everyone looked at her step by step as she walked closer. The layers of the dress were like piled-up black waves. Each layer was bordered with gold thread, so the layers were distinct. On top of it, there were deep red and light red flowers, and bright red flowers were blooming. It was too beautiful to behold. It was the first time Gong Yimo wore such a headdress on her head. There were a total of 72 pieces of pure gold hair accessories on her head. It looked very domineering, but Gong Yimo's heart was bitter. It was really unbearable. It could be said that it was the first time in her life that she looked like this. Gong Dai suddenly felt that in the future, when they got married, the royal sister's outfit was very good. It was very suitable to wear on the wedding day. Facing everyone's gaze, Gong Yimo walked in with her head held high and her chest puffed out. With every step, a little of the gemstone flowers on her embroidered shoes would be revealed. Under the bright lights, it was dazzling for no reason. In this way, she walked step by step to the front of the hall under everyone's watchful eyes. Such elegance, such bearing, it made all the women envious. Chapter 288. Imperial Father, this subject son is late, Gong Yimo said with some embarrassment. Emperor Gong couldn't help but glare at her. Originally, Gong Yimo wanted to go with him to the palace gate to welcome the emperor, but she came today wearing a plain cotton dress. Emperor Gong had to take out the clothes prepared for her during the conferring ceremony in advance and forced her to dress up again. Otherwise, it would be so embarrassing. Okay, go sit down. The emperor's tone seemed to be bad, but everyone could feel the doting in his tone. Kim Yoon originally thought that Gong Yimo wouldn't have a good time when she came back, but it seems that he worried too much. Gong Yimo. How could anyone not like her? He stared at Gong Yimo and watched her sit next to the crown prince, diagonally across from him. I haven't seen her for so long. She hasn't changed at all. Feeling Kim Yoon's gaze, Gong Yimo winked at him, which made Kim Yoon laugh involuntarily. That moment of amazement was diluted a lot. No matter how she dressed up, she was still Moa. He looked at her deeply. It's only been a while, but he felt like years had passed. When Gong Yimo was by his side, he didn't feel it. Although he knew that Gong Yimo would leave one day, he never thought that it would be so soon, so sudden. These days, when he walked in the mansion without her, he always thought, if he had expressed his feelings earlier, would the result be different? If he had grasped power earlier, If he had noticed the strangeness of his imperial mother, then would Gong Yimo still leave? Really, he obviously had such a good opportunity, but he missed it. When she wasn't in the prince's mansion, it wasn't the home he wanted to go back to every time he went out. Yuheng wasn't Yuheng, it was like a big cage. He couldn't hear a trace of laughter in it. Emperor Gong glanced at Kim Yoon. The loneliness and longing on his face were so obvious that he couldn't help but change the topic. Before the banquet begins, let's get down to business first. Let's drink a few more cups during the celebration later. That way, we'll be able to get rid of one of our worries. Only then did Jin Yoon withdraw his gaze as if he had just woken up from a dream. He no longer looked at her and readily agreed. That is how it should be. Gong Cheng laughed and said loudly, "Send a letter." Chang Shi hurriedly announced, "Send a letter." The so-called letter of credence was the content of the cooperation between the two countries. This was agreed upon long ago. This time, Kim Yoon came. If there were no problems, as long as he stamped the seal, this matter would be officially finalized. A palace servant stepped forward respectfully and presented the two letters of credence that had been prepared long ago. On the two golden brocades, there were neat words in cinnabar that looked like they were printed. It clearly stated the matters after the two countries started trading, responsibilities, and the regulations that had been discussed together. It was clearly and in detail. Kim Yoon glanced at it and knew that there were no problems. As for the cooperation between the two countries, because Emperor Gong Cheng had handed it over to Gong Dai, they had a private discussion and agreement. It didn't appear in the letter of credence. Kim Yoon took out the seal and suddenly smiled. "Uncle, when Mo was in Yuheng in the past, every time there was a major decision, she would be the one to stamp it. This time, this little nephew would like to trouble her again." He smiled, but the words that came out of his mouth stunned everyone present. Everyone had a different meaning in his words and each had their own thoughts. But Emperor Gong knew that Kim Yoon wanted to say that his relationship with Gong Yimo was very good, and he only trusted Gong Yimo. So he laughed, "What's the harm? Mo, come forward." Gong Yimo was very embarrassed. She didn't expect that Kim Yoon would suddenly mention this matter. As an outsider, participating in politics wasn't something to be proud of. If the emperor misunderstood, the one who would be in trouble would be her. Sigh. Gong Yimo sighed, resigned to her fate, and walked straight up. During the process, Kim Yoon looked at her with a smile. The expression in his eyes was deeply hidden, but if one looked carefully, one could see a trace of bitterness. Gong Yimo didn't notice and glared at him fiercely. "Really, I haven't seen him for a while. How did he become so strange?" Taking the private seal from Kim Yoon, Gong Yimo slightly raised her eyebrows and easily stamped it. At this time, in order to ease Gong Yimo's embarrassment, Emperor Gong suddenly laughed. "In that case, Mo, this emperor's dragon seal will also be handed over to you. You will be the witness of this letter of credence." The emperor's words were equivalent to pushing Gong Yimo to the forefront of a new wave. The emperor's imperial jade seal, that was something that even the crown prince couldn't easily touch. Behind the curtain, many women exclaimed in surprise. They didn't expect that Gong Yimo, who was also a woman, had the qualifications to use the imperial jade seal in this kind of occasion. This honor was really unprecedented. It could be said that she had achieved the pinnacle of being a woman. Kim Yoon's smile froze for a moment, but soon relaxed. Gong Yimo was at a loss. Holding Kim Yoon's private seal in her hand, she felt as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. She thought for a moment and simply held Kim Yoon's private seal in one hand and the Emperor's imperial jade seal in the other. Both of her hands stamped on the two identical letters of credence. Since this was the first step to opening the Golden Age, since it was because of her, then it would be decided by her. This scene seemed to have been arranged by the underworld. Everyone witnessed this historical scene. "The letter of credence is complete," the eunuch joyfully shouted, and the whole country rejoiced. From today onwards, there would be no more martial law between the people of the two countries. Not only could they trade, they could even marry. However, the necessary national defense would still be in place, and transnational marriage would still be difficult. It was impossible to truly integrate, but the first step of peace had been taken. At least, Yuheng wouldn't be at odds with Dayu state. This was the greatest political achievement. There were 2 copies of the letters of credence, and both were solemnly kept by the people of the 2 countries. Emperor Gong was overjoyed and waved his hand loudly. "Let the banquet begin." "Chang," she quickly said with a smile. "His Majesty has decreed that the banquet shall begin." Several women in palace attire slowly walked out, and the sound of gong music rang out. They all wore light veils and danced, and each of them had a smile on their faces. It was very festive. The palace servants came in line by line, and presented the dishes. The atmosphere became lively, and many people's faces turned red. Today was really a good day. Gong Yimo naturally returned to her seat. She was just about to breathe a sigh of relief and eat something, but she didn't expect that Kim Yoon would not let her go. From the moment Gong Yimo approached him, his heart began to beat faster and faster. He also understood what he wanted the most. Uncle, a straightforward person doesn't resort to insinuations. This nephew came here this time to ask for a favor. Emperor Gong was so happy that he didn't guess what he wanted to say. "Nephew, there's no harm in saying it." Kim Yoon smiled. At this moment, his whole person was like an extremely dazzling pearl. His beautiful eyes fell on Gong Yimo's body, and his tone was full of tenderness and determination. "I want to marry Mo-er. I hope that uncle will grant my wish." Chapter 289. Gong Cheng stares blankly. At this time, because the palace music is very loud, Gong Cheng might have heard his words. His head that was dizzy with joy just now suddenly straightens up. He thinks for a moment and says seriously, "Jun has a lot of princesses. If nephew wants to marry, it doesn't have to be Mo-er." Kim Yoon can't help but glance at Gong Yimo. At this time, she is talking to Gong Dai. It seems like they are talking about her interesting story in Yuheng. Her eyes turn into crescents as she smiles. That kind of lively, why can't he monopolize her? So he smiles and says, "Perhaps uncle's daughters are all outstanding, but I only want Mo-er." Gong Cheng's face darkens. Kim Yoon quickly says, "I know uncle is not at ease with me. You think I have a conspiracy and want to covet the weapon in Mo-er's hand. But Mo-er said that one day, she will let the Jade Emperor come out. So before that, I can wait." Gong Cheng is shocked. He didn't expect Mo-er to have the idea of letting that thing come out. "So I only hope that I can set a marriage contract with Mo-er. When she hands over the weapon, I will be allowed to marry her home." Kim Yoon lowers his head. Even the purple gold crown on his head is not half as exquisite as his eyebrows. At this time, his expression is sincere and focused, with a hint of caution. "If uncle agrees, I, Kim Yoon, swear again that I will only marry her in this life. If there is any violation, I will be abandoned by the gods." Hearing this, Gong Cheng is shocked. He looks him up and down a few times. In the end, he is somewhat emotional. Mo-er is really good at reading people. He has to say that if he really wants to marry Mo-er, Kim Yoon is indeed a good candidate. He is young and handsome, and also the ruler of a country. He should be at an age where he is arrogant. But now, he is willing to be a concubine and plead with him for Mo-er. He is even willing to swear that he will only marry Mo-er. He had been the emperor for a long time, so he knew very well how much pressure it was to favor someone, just like concubine Xue. But he couldn't do it, and he was unwilling to do it now. This young man was willing to do it for his daughter. As an outsider, he definitely didn't agree with Kim Yoon's way of doing things, but as a father, he was really gratified. Maybe it was because of the alcohol or something else, but he thought, if Mo-er really handed over that thing, why couldn't they get married? Although he was very reluctant, Mo-er was very smart and capable. He was unwilling to sacrifice his daughter's happiness for the sake of development. Was there no talent in Dayu State? So he opened his mouth and was about to agree when Gong Ju suddenly stood up. Gong Le seemed to have stopped for a moment because of this. Even Gong Yimo felt that it was strange. From the beginning, Gong Dai had been looking at the emperor. What did he hear? It couldn't be. It was so noisy that she couldn't hear anything. Emperor Cheng glanced at him with some dissatisfaction, but he suddenly thought of something and didn't question him. Instead, he waved at Gong Dai. Gong Ju walked towards him, But his eyes fell coldly on Jin Yoon's body, carrying a cold murderous intent. Kim Yoon seemed to feel something and raised his head to look at him. Gong Dai. He knew him, but the hostility on his body made him vigilant. Emperor Cheng patted Gong Dai's shoulder and smiled at Kim Yoon. This is my 9th son. Regarding the cooperation with the bank, I have given him full authority. At this time, he added mischievously, he is also the brother that Moa cares about the most. The two of them have a good relationship. Kim Yoon naturally understood Gong Dai's situation. Perhaps the other party was unhappy with him because he sensed that he was here to steal his sister. When he thought of Gong Dai's position in Gong Yimo's heart, which was equivalent to his brother-in-law, his attitude was modest and he gently smiled. In Yuheng, Moa often mentioned him. Now that I've seen him today, his appearance is indeed outstanding and his talent is shocking. He really admired Gong Dai because he opened the bank under Moa's proposal. But what about Gong Dai? At that time, he was still so young, but he was able to seize the opportunity quickly and set up a bank in Daiyu State. He was really young and promising. His elder's attitude deeply stimulated Gong Dai. Wasn't he just 7 or 8 years older than him? What qualifications did he have? He coldly smiled. Imperial father, what were you talking about just now? You seem to be very happy. In front of Gong Dai, Emperor Cheng didn't intend to hide anything. He said, Prince Yuheng wants to marry Moa. His sincerity has moved Imperial father. Ha ha ha. A trace of coldness flashed through Gong Dai's cold eyes. But royal sister has already vowed not to marry in this life. Imperial father, do you want to go back on your words? Hearing his words, Emperor Cheng's face gradually turned ugly. If Moa handed over the weapon, why can't she marry? If he granted the marriage, what would others dare to say? Kim Yoon was a bit stunned. Moa vowed not to marry in this life. Without waiting for Emperor Cheng to force him to say something irrevocable, Gong Dai lightly said. Moreover, this matter is related to royal sister's life. For the sake of royal sister wholeheartedly serving Daiyu State, shouldn't Imperial father ask for royal sister's opinion? With a few words, he suddenly changed the dominant position, making Kim Yoon nervous. Moa, will she be willing to marry him? Emperor Cheng also felt that Gong Dai's words were reasonable. But he, who was used to being tyrannical, almost forgot to ask for Moa's opinion. So he smiled at Kim Yoon. That's also reasonable. Since nephew has the heart, I also have to ask Moa's opinion. Nephew, please wait a few more days. I will give you an answer. Kim Yoon secretly hated Gong Dai for messing up the situation, but at this time, he couldn't say anything and quickly agreed. But when he looked at Gong Dai again, his eyes showed a touch of vigilance. It seems that if he wants to marry Moa, he really has to go through this brother-in-law. If Gong Dai knew that he secretly called him brother-in-law, he's afraid that he won't be able to restrain himself from crippling her. From a moment ago, he felt that Kim Yoon's eyes were strange when he looked at royal sister, so he paid attention to the shape of his lips when he spoke and replayed the conversation between him and the emperor in his heart. When he saw that the emperor was so proud of his words that he almost agreed to it, he finally couldn't help but stand up. Fortunately, the emperor was still rational and was persuaded back by him. Otherwise, if royal sister suddenly got engaged and had a fiancé, it would really make him crazy. Just thinking of this, he looked at Kim Yoon even more sternly. Royal sister is his. She was his when she was 7 years old, and he didn't allow anyone to spy on her. As for royal sister preparing to hand over that thing one day? When Gong Dai returned to his seat, his whole body was cold because royal sister had never mentioned this to him. At this time, Gong Yimo felt that Gong Dai was acting strangely and asked carefully, "What's wrong?" Gong Dai turned to look at her, and suddenly, he smiled. Why was this smile so scary? Gong Yimo couldn't help but want to retreat, but Gong Dai grabbed her hand from under the table, tightly. "Royal sister, do you like Kim Yoon?" Chapter 290. Gong Yimo was stunned for a moment, then she smiled and said, "How is that possible?" Although Kim Yoon was very attentive and beautiful, just like the brother next door, only the heavens knew that she had never even touched his hand when she was in Yuheng. Moreover, Kim Yoon was also a gentleman and had never done anything that crossed the line with her. Why did Gong Dai suddenly ask about this? Hearing Gong Yimo's unhesitant answer, Gong Dai couldn't help but smile. Unlike the aggressive and threatening smile from before, this time, his smile was as clear as the wind and clear as the moon, but with a trace of joy and affection. Under the table, his hand gently traced the outline of Gong Yimo's palm as he spoke in a low voice. Kim Yoon said that he likes you and wants to marry you. That's impossible, Gong Yimo said without even thinking. After all, she had asked Kim Yoon this question no less than 3 times, and he had always said that he didn't like her, so she had always been at ease and treated him as an older brother. Gong Dai raised his eyebrows slightly. Just now, Imperial Father almost agreed, Royal Sister. If you can't do it because you're close to Kim Yoon, I'm very willing to do it for you. He was serious when he said this. If it wasn't for the fact that Gong Yimo didn't like other people interfering with her matters without her consent, he really wanted to immediately chase Kim Yoon back to Yuheng and never see him again. Gong Yimo smiled and waved her hand. You must have misheard. But when she saw Gong Dai's cold expression and saw that he didn't seem to be joking, she swallowed and said, You, don't interfere, I can handle it myself. Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and smiled. That'd better be the case. He was really willing to make a move. However, if he made a move, what would happen to Kim Yoon? What would happen to him? How would he feel when he returned? Those were not within the scope of his consideration. Seeing Gong Yimo and Gong Dai chatting happily, the wine glass in Gong Che's hand almost shattered. At this moment, he turned his head and said to Gong Yimo as if he had thought of something. Moa, speaking of the Grand Canal conferring ceremony, Imperial Father intends to make you the saintess to pray for the blessings of the world. Gong Yimo turned around to hear this and immediately felt a headache coming on. Can't you just find any woman? Imperial Father has so many daughters, why do you have to choose me? She adjusted the crown on her head. Fortunately, her hair was thick and long. Otherwise, she would have to wear a wig to fit so many hairpins. Just by looking at her expression, he could tell what she was thinking. Gong Che's heart warmed and he couldn't help but smile. Oh this is an honor that others can't even dream of. You're actually trying to push it away. Gong Yimo pursed her lips. This was the bad thing about the ancients. They always wanted to hold a ceremony for everything and announce it to the world. You were the one who named the Grand Canal. Therefore, only you are the most suitable person to do this. Gong Che's eyes were filled with adoration as he spoke. Gong Yimo nodded. Forget it. I only hope that Imperial Father can simplify the ceremony on account of my hard work day and night, she pouted slightly. Because that was simply impossible. Gong Dai listened to their conversation but didn't say anything. He only focused on playing with Gong Yimo's fingers under the table. If he wanted to be the royal sister's man, he couldn't hold her too tightly. If he held her too tightly, she would want to escape. But he couldn't let her go too easily either. If he let her go, she would return to her original state and focus on being a coward. He was really vexed. His royal sister was so difficult to handle. It could be said that she was the biggest problem he had ever faced in his life. The banquet ended in this extremely harmonious atmosphere. When Gong Yimo was about to leave the palace, she was stopped by the Empress. The Empress was probably looking for her as an excuse. The main point was that she probably wanted to ask for her opinion. After all, this wasn't a small matter. Sure enough, on the way back to the bedroom, the Empress asked about it. Moa, what do you think of second Prince Yuheng? The two walked in front and the palace servants followed behind them from a distance. It was obvious that they didn't dare to disturb them. Brother Kim Yoon, he's very good. Gong Yimo smiled. The Empress was delighted, but before she could persuade her, she said again. It's just that I treat him as my brother. If it's any other relationship, it's impossible. The Empress' face stiffened. Moa, it's just a joke to say that you won't marry for the rest of your life. Don't take it seriously. Gong Yimo said lightly, since I said it, it's a promise. Although I'm a woman of my words. The Empress sighed. She couldn't say more. After all, she wasn't her own flesh and blood. Now she could only hope that her son had really given up. As for the rest, she really couldn't care less. After sending the Empress to Fengqi Palace, Gong Yimo prepared to go to Taiji Palace. After all, that place was bestowed to her. It was already so late and she didn't want to leave the palace. After sending away the palace servants who were leading the way, she walked alone on the road to Taiji Palace. In fact, Kim Yoon's matter had touched her. Thinking back to the day when she left, Kim Yoon danced for her for the first time. She seemed to have vaguely sensed something at that time. But after she left, she didn't think about it anymore. Did he really like her, or did he value her ability and want her to be used by him like before? Unknowingly, she walked to a waterside pavilion. A trace of cold water vapor hit her in the face, clearing her mind. She sat down by the waterside pavilion and carefully thought about the problem that had been troubling her for a while. She couldn't accept Gong Dai's feelings. She hadn't solved it yet, and now, there was another Kim Yoon. Are you unhappy? The sudden voice gave Gong Yimo a fright. She was too engrossed and didn't notice that someone had come. She suddenly turned around and saw Kim Yoon. At this time, he seemed to have freshened up. He was wearing a moon-white robe and his hair was loose. Standing in front of her, he really looked like a female ghost. Gong Yimo couldn't help but laugh. But this ghost was really stunning. Kim Yoon saw her laugh and couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He thought that she would be unhappy after Gong Dai told her. He didn't expect that she didn't show an expression of rejection. Then, did it mean that he had a chance? Kim Yoon's heart thumped. He sat beside Gong Yimo with a serious expression. It was Gong Yimo who spoke first. It's not that I'm unhappy. I just want to sit here for a while and think about life. Then what are you thinking about? Kim Yoon felt that she was by his side. This feeling was as if he had returned to the prince's residence. It made him feel relaxed and happy for no reason. Gong Yimo blinked. I'm thinking about you. Kim Yoon was stunned. At that moment, his face turned red. Although it couldn't be seen clearly in the night, but his sudden chaotic breathing made Gong Yimo sigh. Do you really like me? Her question was so straightforward that it was impossible to resist. Kim Yoon tried to figure out her expression and nodded lightly. Gong Yimo became even more depressed. But I've asked you this question many times. Why didn't you say it before? Chapter 291. Her words made Kim Yoon slightly dazed. He seemed to have thought of something. He sighed and smiled bitterly. Because I wasn't good enough for you at that time. So, Gong Yimo raised her eyebrows. Why would you have such thoughts? Then she felt that this sentence was not right and said, what I mean is, why would you feel inferior? Is it the same for everyone? Could this be the truth behind why Kim Yoon hadn't married for so long? Kim Yoon recalled the past and smiled faintly. It's not the same for everyone, but for you, it's the same. Gong Yimo was speechless. She didn't know why he would think that. Kim Yoon looked deeply at her and said softly, you know, since I was young, I had a hard time and was very depressed. But I was also very conceited. My royal brothers couldn't memorize the texts for many days, but I could memorize them in one day. Moreover, they were often troubled by the grand tutor, but I was able to draw inferences. Speaking of this, his lips curled into a smile, but it was a bitter smile. Perhaps it was because I didn't know how to restrain myself when I was young, so they complained to me and I couldn't study at a young age. Although I wanted to, I couldn't go against imperial father's orders. Now, I can only read. I really don't know anything about poetry and songs. Gong Yimo felt sorry for him for no reason. Perhaps, this was the process that beautiful Jade had to go through. He frowned slightly. At that time, I didn't understand. I was smart, hardworking, and motivated. In terms of appearance and character, I was better than my brothers. Why didn't Imperial Father trust me and even doubt my birth? Could it be that I didn't deserve those praises? Why couldn't they see my good points and only blame me for my mistakes and call me a bastard? So I gradually felt inferior. This inferiority may have been deeply rooted. Later on, when I was cross-dressing and dancing, I actually felt satisfied when I heard the exclamations of the people around me. I wanted to be praised by the world and receive their affirmation. Perhaps. I'm already beyond saving. Back when I was in Yuheng, I had already achieved so much. My brothers could no longer stop me. But when I faced you, I still felt inferior. When I faced power, I still didn't dare to take that step. But after you left, I easily obtained Yuheng's imperial power. Only then did I realize how close I was to these things, just like you back then. He suddenly reached out and gently covered the back of Gong Yimo's hand. Gong Yimo raised her head and looked at him. Her beautiful eyes seemed to be shining. Even the mole under her eye was full of charm. It was breathtaking. You're very good to me. You're beautiful and talented. Just like the blazing sun, anyone who was by your side would receive unlimited power. And I'm like a stalk of grass, a flower. You let me grow, but I want to have you. What a delusion. This idea is laughable, but that's what I thought back then. I knew that you would leave one day, but I couldn't even say the words to make you stay. I didn't dare to admit my feelings for you. So when you asked me, my friends asked me, and even my mother asked me, I would tell them that I don't like you. But every time, I would shout crazily in my heart that it was all fake. I like you. I've liked you for a long, long time. His words suddenly made Gong Yimo feel as if she had been burned by fire. She quickly retracted her hand. You think too highly of me. I'm not as noble as you think. Kim Yoon smiled. What's the matter? Your kindness to me is like giving me a new life. I didn't dare to say it before because I didn't have the right. But now, I have the power in my hands. He raised his voice a little. That faint domineering aura was something that Kim Yoon didn't have in the past. He was the kind of person who would only get what he got. For example, if he had enough money, he would become very magnanimous. If he had enough power, he would become very domineering. And now, Kim Yoon was moving towards the latter. She had never expected that Jin Yoon would undergo such a huge change, and it was all because of her. She didn't know that after she left, Kim Yoon's mood was so irritable that even his mother didn't dare to approach him. He suppressed his madness, but couldn't put it into practice. That was why there was a qualitative change now. Gong Yimo's face was tense as she said, maybe it's because I helped you, so you've developed a dependence on me. This isn't love. In my heart, I've always treated you as an older brother. There's no such thing as love between a man and a woman. Her words made Kim Yoon's pupils shrink. Actually, at that time, he had always thought about what to do if Moa rejected him after he expressed his feelings. At that time, when he thought of this result, he felt ashamed and absent-minded. It was hard for him to accept it. But now, other than his heartache, he felt even more unconvinced. He already had so much. He was already above others. Why was it that others could have it, but he couldn't? So he once again grabbed Gong Yimo and asked in a deep voice. Am I not good? What do you not like about me? I'll change, okay? His voice gradually lowered. You can't imagine what kind of life I've been living. The prince's residence used to be the place I looked forward to the most. But without you, there wasn't a trace of life there. When I failed, it was you who encouraged me. When I was hurt, it was you who saved me. When I was in trouble, it was you who pointed the way. In the past 3 years, my life has been filled with your shadow. Why are you so cruel to me? If you can't belong to me, why did you let me meet you? His words were sorrowful. Gong Yimo couldn't answer his words at all. But at this moment, a murderous aura suddenly appeared. Gong Yimo quickly pushed Kim Yoon away. On the ground, there was a thin withered branch that was trembling slightly. It fiercely stabbed into the stone floor. If Gong Yimo had been a little later, this withered branch would have pierced through Kim Yoon's hand. Who? Kim Yoon's expression turned cold. He looked up. At this moment, his whole body was surrounded by danger and evil aura. He was really different from the previous him. Gong Dai walked out from the shadows. His dark black robes blended into the night. His white face and black jade-like eyes appeared cold and cheerless under the moonlight. But when those cold and cheerless eyes landed on Jin Yoon, they carried a murderous intent. Gong Yimo was a little ashamed. Didn't he go back? Why was he still in the palace? And to be caught red-handed at this time, she felt embarrassed just thinking about it. At this moment, Gong Dai walked step by step to Gong Yimo's side. At this moment, she was still wearing her brocade robes. The black and red palace dress and Gong Dai's black robes complemented each other, as if they were a match made in heaven. Kim Yoon didn't sense the danger and narrowed his eyes. Prince Chi, is it? Why did you suddenly attack me? Is this how Dai Yu State treats its guests? But when Gong Dai heard this, he didn't even look at him. He only looked quietly at Gong Yimo. Then, he lowered his head and gently kissed her forehead. Kim Yoon's eyes suddenly widened. Gong Dai's voice was like ice. Because you violated a taboo. She is my woman. Chapter 292. Gong Dai. Gong Yimo was shocked by his words, but it wasn't only Gong Yimo who was shocked. Kim Yoon was too. He took a step back. Kim Yoon couldn't accept the scene before him. He didn't expect Gong Dai to like Gong Yimo. Weren't they brother and sister? Even Gong Yimo felt awkward. Although she knew very well that she wasn't related to Gong Dai by blood, outsiders didn't know. They looked at them with shock. Despicable. Thinking of this, she took a few steps back. In the corridor of the waterside pavilion, the three of them stood in a triangular formation. Their expressions were grave. Impossible. Moa. Did he force you? Come with me. The Dai Yu State's palace looked clean, but the interior was the same as Yuheng's in the past. Kim Yoon hurriedly grabbed Gong Yimo's hand, but Gong Dai was faster. He pulled Gong Yimo into his arms and sneered at Kim Yoon. I'll say it again. Momo is mine. He rested his chin on Gong Yimo's head. And you don't belong to the Dai Yu State. You don't have the right to interfere in our matters. No. Impossible, Moa. Don't tell me you like him. Kim Yoon's face turned pale. He couldn't believe it. Gong Yimo wanted to resist, but Gong Dai held her firmly in his arms. It's me who likes her. Gong Dai said coldly, you said that Momo saved you, but she also saved me. She was even willing to give up her life for me. You said that Momo helped you, but she also helped me because she said that I was the most important person to her. You said that Momo accompanied you for 3 years. It was cruel for her to leave you, but she has been by my side since I was 6 years old. Gong Dai had never said such a long speech to an outsider, but every word came from the bottom of his heart. At this moment, he sneered and asked, if it's cruel for God to take her away from you, then what about me? His voice was calm and cold. If Kim Yoon had to have her for 3 years, then what about him? If Gong Yimo left him, what would he do? He would go crazy. He would kill everyone. He would become what Gong Yimo was afraid of. He would become what he was in his previous life. But your siblings. Jin Yoon's lips instantly lost their color. It was as if these words had exhausted all of his strength. Gong Yimo wanted to move, but Gong Ju held her tightly. So what? Momo, she likes me. Gong Yimo's eyes widened. Just as she was about to speak, Gong Dai pressed hard on her chest, blocking her words. Kim Yoon saw that Gong Yimo didn't refute, and he couldn't stand still. He had thought that he would lose, but he never thought that he would lose to someone he thought was his brother-in-law. There was no reason for this. Moa, have you forgotten what you said before? Kim Yoon suddenly said, you said that you were afraid that the world wouldn't like you and hate you. But what are you doing now? Aren't you afraid? Gong Yimo trembled when she heard this. The hatred in the eyes of those people in her previous life was still vivid in her mind. She was afraid. She was still afraid. Gong Dai felt her emotions almost instantly. He hugged her tightly, just like how she hugged him in the cold palace. I won't let anyone have the chance to hurt her. You don't have to worry about this. His words were like a sharp knife, causing Jin Yoon to feel a stabbing pain, but the two people in front of him were like one. He couldn't get in between them. This feeling of difference made him take 2 steps back. Then, he suddenly turned around and left. It shouldn't be like this. In Yuheng, he was the one that Moa paid the most attention to. It shouldn't be like this. After he left, Gong Yimo couldn't hold it in anymore. She silently pushed Gong Dai away. Feeling that she was angry, Gong Dai didn't force her and let go of her. You heard it too. Gong Yimo raised her head and said. At this time, the golden crown on her head reflected a cold light with her movements, making Gong Dai's heart sink. She pursed her lips and continued. There's a huge chasm between the two of us. Previously, I was pressured by you to the point that I couldn't calm down. But now, I've thought it through. In this life, I still want to walk this path alone. Her voice was very low, but every word reached Gong Dai's ears. A person might be lonely and long, but she would have to bear a lot less. She wouldn't have to worry about being despised by the world when she was with Gong Dai. She wouldn't have to worry about being used by his enemies to attack him. She also wouldn't have to worry about being with him and being afraid that he would have a change of heart. Liking someone was really too scary. Sometimes, when you lost your heart, you would no longer be yourself. Moreover, even if she and Gong Dai were in a secret relationship, would Gong Dai still not marry? When the time came, would she have to share him with other women and then worry about personal gains and losses? It was too scary and too tiring. She might as well give up from the beginning. Gong Dai didn't seem to be agitated. He was even smiling. It was as if Gong Yimo wasn't calmly drawing a line with him just now. Instead, she was throwing a tantrum with him in the heat of the moment. You want to leave me? Gong Dai asked softly. It's as if you're using me to make Kim Yoon give up. What do you want to do? Make me give up? Gong Yimo couldn't answer this question. How could Gong Dai give up? She. Marry? Don't think about it. Gong Dai seemed to be able to guess her thoughts. He spoke quickly and calmly. I'll kill whoever you marry. Even if you marry overseas, I'll start a war and snatch you back. When the time comes, you'll either kill me on the battlefield or be snatched back by me and become my exclusive pet. Why should I? Gong Yimo was furious. She glared at him. Because I love you to the core. But this was even harder for Gong Yimo to accept. That's your business. I don't owe you anything. Why are you doing this to me? Can't you be obedient for once? Isn't it good to be like before? Her life started from the day she opened her eyes. It started from the moment she chose to curry favor with the emperor and become a princess. She thought that she would be involved with the Gong family. She didn't take revenge because they hadn't done anything to her. But that didn't mean that she owed them anything. She had to sell it to them. She yelled at him, but Gong Ju remained quiet and calm. His picturesque eyebrows stared at her intently, making her anger seem unreasonable. Gong Yimo suddenly felt wronged. In the next moment, tears welled up in her eyes. She knew that she was being unreasonable, but she just couldn't bear it. She squatted down and forcefully removed the golden hairpins on her head and threw them on the ground. You're doing this on purpose. You're deliberately bullying me. I already said that I hate this set of headwear. Why do you still want me to wear it? Chapter 293. Her movements were very forceful. Seeing that her hair bun was in a mess, Gong Dai squatted down and grabbed her hand in time. Then, he personally removed her hairpin. His movements were so light and gentle. It was like he was a completely different person compared to when he was facing Kim Yoon. Gong Yimo looked at him with red eyes. Large pieces of clothing were spread out on the ground. She was like a little rabbit in luxurious clothes, waiting to bite someone. Gong Dai smiled. He gently removed the jewelry on her head. The process did not hurt her at all. Although the two of them were squatting together, there was still some distance between them. Royal sister, do you think that you're very pitiful to encounter such a thing? He removed a hair ornament from her head. His expression was as cold as water, and there was a faint smile on his face. I also think that I'm very pitiful. Gong Yimo calmed down and choked out, how are you pitiful? She was clearly the one who was troubled, all right? Her originally good life suddenly had so many emotional entanglements, and it was the love entanglements that she was most afraid of. What did she say? Gong Dai chuckled. I'm not pitiful now. Although I lost my mother when I was very young and was banished to the cold palace, during that time, there were people who wanted to kill me every day. However, I met you. His fingertips lightly brushed through her hair. His gaze stopped on her hair bun, as if he was saying something unimportant. You might not know. When I was young, I hated everyone. Every time I survived after being ruthlessly tortured, I would clean my wounds while thinking about how I would kill those people when I grew up. At that time, Hatred was the only thing that kept me going. When he said this, he smiled faintly. You might not know, but the punishments in Zhao prison that make people pale when they hear them was something I thought of when I was young. At that time, I thought that not only would I slowly kill the people who hurt me, those masterminds and accomplices behind the scenes, I would not let a single one of them off. After removing the hairpin on the right, Gong Dai moved to the left and gently and carefully removed the hairpin on the left for her. Some of the hairpins got caught in her hair when she pulled them just now. He would also gently smooth out her hair as if he was treating a rare treasure, without any impatience. And those palace servants in the cold palace. Those people didn't hurt me, but I was a prince and their master. However, when someone tried to harm me, they didn't help me because of their cowardice. So, I have to kill them too. Gong Yimo's heart was originally very sad and distressed, but after hearing what he said, she calmed down instead. She remembered his careful and vigilant eyes when they first met. She never thought that he would have such a mental journey. She also didn't know that he was so bloodthirsty at such a young age. No wonder in her previous life, when he gained power, the first thing he did was to wash the palace with blood. At that time, even Su Miaolan couldn't stop him. Gong Dai continued, but you see, after I came out of the cold palace, I was so obedient. I wholeheartedly studied. Whether it was Liu Xianfei, Gui Fei, or those who betrayed me in the cold palace, I didn't take revenge on any of them. Do you know why? After removing all the hairpins, he stopped and suddenly looked at her quietly. Why? Gong Yimo's eyes were still red. She squatted on the ground obediently like a small ball, making Gong Dai want to kiss her and hug her again. His fair fingertips sank into her fine black hair. First, you don't like it. Gong Dai reached out to remove the largest golden crown on her head. His chin was slightly raised, and he gently smiled. You don't like it when I kill people over small matters. You always said that when you don't cross the bottom line, it's better to have the strength to argue with those people than to strengthen yourself. At that time, when I made a move on Liu Xianfei or Gui Fei, I was afraid that I didn't do a clean job and implicated you, so I was very obedient for 2 years. Gong Yimo nodded, but that was because she didn't know. If she knew that Gong Dai had so much resentment in his heart, even if he didn't want to take revenge, she would have taught them a lesson. Anger in the heart can't be suppressed, it will make a child twisted. There's another reason, it's also because of you. Gong Yimo stared at him with wide eyes. At this moment, Gong Dai's smile was extremely gentle. The waterside corridor was quiet at this time. The faint moonlight cast down, illuminating Gong Dai's face. Because of you, I am very satisfied. Gong Yimo was stunned. Sometimes, I think that the reason why I suffered and was humiliated in the past was all because you were going to come to my side. Gong Yimo looked up in confusion, but she met his eyes. Cold, clear, black and white, but it was full of her reflection. In this world, there's no woman more beautiful, more excellent, and more kind-hearted than you. But you came to my world and pulled me from the darkness to the light. You cared for me, took care of me, and taught me how to read and write. After leaving the cold palace, the first thing you did was to do business with grandfather. I often saw you very tired, lying on the table and sleeping. When I asked you, was money important? You said that you were earning a lot of money now, so I would have something to rely on in the future. So, I, who hated to look at accounts, seriously studied it for more than a month and began to take over these businesses. You saw that my career was not going well, so you wanted father to put me in an important position. But you were afraid that I would be sent to an unfamiliar place and be persecuted. So, you studied the geography of the West Continent and thought of ways to send me to grandfather, so that I would be safe and also be able to perform meritorious deeds. At this time, there was a soft click. Gong Dai opened the crown on Gong Yimo's head, held it up with both hands, and then flung it back. All of Gong Yimo's fine black hair was released in an instant, sliding in a beautiful arc in the night sky before it all fell down. Look at you, not only did you give me care, hope, and talent, you also gave me everything that a man in this world wants to have. Monstrous wealth, shocking power. You always said that you wanted to give the best in this world to me. But with you like this, what right do I have to take revenge and complain about the past? He put the golden crown on the ground and held Gong Yimou's face with both hands. At this time, she seemed to be in a daze. Her eyes were wide open, and she had long forgotten that she was angry and angry. His eyes seemed to contain starlight and endless gentleness. Having you, I am the happiest person in this world. But if you only give me wealth and status, but not your feelings, then I would rather not have met you in the first place. Perhaps darkness, pain, struggle, and distortion, but it is better than having you and then losing you. That will only make me crazy, make me remember all of my hatred, and become the person I was before I met you. But now you want to do that. Tell me, am I not very pitiful? Chapter 294. Gong Yimou looked at him and was rendered speechless by his glib tongue. Gong Dai's learning ability was really fast. When Kim Yoon talked to her, he talked to her. When Kim Yoon confessed, he confessed as well. What's more, he said it better than Kim Yoon. Seeing that she didn't say anything, Gong Dai obviously didn't want to let her off. Royal sister, you haven't said whether I'm pitiful or miserable. Gong Yimou could even hear the laughter in his tone, which made her want to laugh too, but she couldn't laugh. Aya, really? Why was Gong Dai always able to grasp her weakness? She clearly wanted to draw a line between them. With that thought, she felt that she couldn't stay any longer and got up. But she had been squatting for too long, so she got up too suddenly and her legs went numb. Her body swayed, and Gong Dai hurriedly supported her. Gong Yimou was resentful. Why didn't Gong Dai's legs go numb? Gong Dai held Gong Yimou's waist with both hands and laughed. Royal sister, you're running away. What am I running away from? Gong Yimou didn't dare to look at him. Her voice was loud, but she was weak inside. Gong Dai's expression calmed down as he said softly, Royal sister, you're running away from your responsibility. Yes, you've given me a lot, but if you don't give yourself to me, I'd rather you had never given me anything. Gong Yimou fell silent. If she could go back in time, she might still save Gong Dai, but would she still put in so much effort? But since you've already given, Gong Dai lowered his head and bit her ear. Then take responsibility until the end. He was crazy. Gong Yimou felt that there was something wrong with this person's logic. Shouldn't it be that since you've given me so much, I'd be embarrassed to ask you for more? Why is it that since you've given me so much, it's your fault if you don't give me your entire being? She glared at Gong Dai angrily. You're twisting logic. No, you're being unreasonable. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. With that, she lifted her skirt, turned around, and ran away. How could he not run? According to past experience, if she didn't run now, she would be taken advantage of. Looking at her back as she left, Gong Dai smiled, but he was secretly sad. He squatted down again and used his coat to pick up all the jewelry on the ground. He was very careful with every piece he picked up. The royal sister looked beautiful in them, but they were too heavy. He had to modify them so that she might be able to use them during the conferring ceremony. Days passed. Kim Yoon and Gong Dai still had to discuss their cooperation, but she didn't know how they discussed it. There was no news from them these few days. As for Gong Che, who was in charge of the conferring ceremony, he hadn't appeared for a few days. Gong Yimou inexplicably heaved a sigh of relief. She nestled in Taiji Palace to read and enjoy her relaxing time. However, she was destined to be busy. Because little Princess Lu Yi, who was supposed to arrive after the conferring ceremony, had actually arrived today, could it be that the moment her imperial brother left, she followed right behind him? She had to admit that she knew the truth. Regarding the little princess, Gong Yimou's heart was still a little uncomfortable. Because in her previous life, Gong Yimou clearly knew how capable this little princess was. She actively advocated for war and wanted to take advantage of Gong Yimou when she was dealing with the internal strife. She even personally took command. In the end, Gong Yimou couldn't take it anymore. In a fit of anger, she directly handed the country over to Gong Dai and dispatched the main army to fight against Lu Yi's army. In the end, she even fought back. That little princess also became a captive. In order to survive, the little princess actually betrayed her own brother and parents who had always doted on her. Gong Yimou wasn't a saint. She didn't sympathize with the other party who started the fight and lost. Moreover, since the fight was already fought, she might as well wipe them all out. Therefore, no matter how despicable the other party's betrayal of their parents was, as long as she could prevent a few of her brothers from dying, she didn't mind taking a shortcut. Therefore, the wise King Lu Yi fell into the hands of his own sister in the end. In the end, he died with his eyes wide open. However, if it wasn't for his parents' indulgence and trust, he wouldn't have ended up like this. Such a flexible, scheming, and ruthless woman was going to marry Gong Dai. She clearly married Hua Ju Wu Yu's brother in her previous life. Why was it different in this life? The other party would probably arrive in the evening. However, the emperor valued her very much. Moreover, his sons were all busy now. Therefore, he could only send Gong Yimo to pick her up. He thought that since they were all girls, perhaps there would be something to talk about. No matter how unwilling Gong Yimo was, she still went. In any case, she would have to meet sooner or later. She wasn't someone who would run away. However, when she went out, she saw that the sky was gloomy. It seemed that even the heavens could feel the resentment in her heart. It was Gong Yimo's first time officially picking someone up. Moreover, her personal sedan chair was carried by 24 golden bearers on the day of the coronation ceremony. In this way, it seemed that the other party was travel-worn, which was a little bad. However, Gong Yimo's gloomy mood immediately turned bright. She happily jumped onto the sedan chair. That little princess's face changed when she was unhappy. It was fun. She wanted to go and provoke her. "Princess, the capital is in front," the maidservant respectfully said. She had many small braids and was wearing agate and other accessories. She looked very exotic. At this moment, a corner of the carriage was lifted, revealing a beautiful woman with deep facial features. Her eyes were not the color of gemstones like her brother's. Instead, they were amber. Her nose was very high and her face was very thin. Although she was good-looking, her cheekbones were a little high. She gave off a somewhat harsh and heartless feeling. Her lips were also thin. At this moment, she raised her eyes and glanced at it. This was the Dai Yu state. Compared to Lu Yi, it was much more imposing and orderly. However, where was the person picking her up? Shouldn't he be waiting at Shili Pavilion outside the city? At this moment, she was almost there. Why couldn't she see anyone? However, when she thought that the person picking her up was most likely Gong Dai, she didn't have a trace of anger. Instead, she faintly smiled. Perhaps Gong Dai himself didn't know that this little princess had seen him before. At that time, she knew that Shiju was building a project called the Well Canal. In order to gain merit, she took a risk and sneaked into Shiju to investigate. That was the first time she saw Gong Dai. At that time, she was still young. Gong Dai was also young. However, his appearance was exquisite. His indifferent and cold aura was especially eye-catching. With just one glance, she felt as if there was a certain emotion beating in her heart. It was hard to forget. It wasn't until later that she found out about the use of the Well Canal. This wonderful idea was single-handedly planned by Gong Dai. In her heart, she yearned for him even more. Such a capable, talented, and beautiful man was much better than those boors like Lu Yi who only knew how to pursue power. Later, even after she returned to Lu Yi, she had always been paying attention to Gong Dai's news. She discovered that he had created countless legends since his arrival. There was no one in Shiju who didn't like him. Their love for him grew deeper and deeper. Therefore, this time, before her imperial brother went to Dai Yu State, he said that he wanted to cooperate with Dai Yu State through marriage. She volunteered to marry far away. Moreover, she came right after her imperial brother left. She already knew that as long as she came to Dai Yu State, Gong Dai would be the most suitable choice for her. She believed that Gong Cheng would do the same. As for his shameless sister. Chapter 295. The little princess furrowed her brows. Women were much more sensitive than men. When she found out about Gong Dai's past, she already felt that there was something wrong with this pair of siblings. Later, her brother's investigation further proved this point. Hence, Gong Yimo was also someone she wanted to deal with this time. She really didn't know what kind of woman could be so shameless that she wouldn't even let her own brother off. She curled her lips into a cold smile. Seeing the long procession, the soldiers guarding the city knew that Lu Yi's princess had arrived. They hurriedly went to inform Gong Yimo. This time, Lu Yi had given enough capital to marry off his sister. Even if the journey was arduous, 10 miles of red dowry was not a joke. Gong Yimo was currently in the city and had already slept. When she heard that someone had arrived, she stretched lazily. After a while, Lu Yi's people entered the city. Lu Yi's envoy dismounted first. When he saw Gong Yimo's carriage, he hurriedly came forward to pay his respects. In the procession, Lu Yi's little princess lifted the curtain to take a look. With just one glance, that grand and luxurious 24 golden lotus carriage immediately occupied her eyes. Compared to the other party, her small carriage was simply too shabby. At this moment, Lu Yi's envoy, Buji, was sitting by the side of the carriage, bowing and chatting with a smile. The neat rows of imperial guards behind the carriage made the little princess blush. Who didn't know that Gong Dai was the leader of the imperial guards in Daiyu State? And now, it was indeed Gong Dai who had come to fetch her. It seemed that the monarch of Daiyu State also approved of this marriage. Soon, Buji returned. He smiled at his princess and said, "Princess, quickly go and greet him. He's a big shot." Buji didn't know what his little princess was thinking, but he still understood Gong Yimo very well. He also admired her. Now that he knew that Gong Yimo had personally come to fetch him, he was overwhelmed by the favor. The little princess pursed her lips and smiled. Then, she was helped down from the carriage. At this time, there were not many people at the city gate, but there were still many commoners watching the show. However, Lu Yi's woman did not care about trifles, and there was no saying that she could not show her face in public. Therefore, the little princess gracefully walked to the side of the golden lotus chariot and spoke softly. "Longcheng's Ting Shui greets my lord." She gracefully bowed, but seeing that the person in the palanquin did not react, she was not angry. Longcheng Tingxue thought that she was somewhat smart. She already knew that Gong Dai had a cold personality and did not like to talk to people, but it did not matter, she was very patient. It's Tingxue's fault for making Sir wait. She smiled, and her voice was soft and harmless. If there was really a man sitting in the golden lotus carriage, he would definitely not be able to bear to see her standing below the carriage and talking. Seeing that Gong Yimo still didn't answer, Long Cheng Tingxue was a little embarrassed. She bit her lip and whispered, "Darren, why don't you speak? Did Tingxue do something wrong?" She was certain that the person inside was Gong Dai, but she definitely did not expect that other than the emperor, the crown prince, and Gong Dai, there was another person who could bring imperial guards and not ordinary palace guards. That person was Gong Yimo. At this time, Gong Yimo waved her hand, and someone lifted the heavy golden curtains, revealing Gong Yimo's astonished little face. "Princess, are you talking to this consort? You kept calling me my lord, so this consort thought that you were calling someone else." She smiled craftily, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. That appearance carried a kind of naughty temperament. But when she saw Gong Yimo and heard her call herself this consort, how could Longcheng Tingxue not know who this person was? She didn't expect that the person sitting in the palanquin was not the person she was thinking of. It was actually Gong Yimo, her greatest enemy on this trip. She had seen Gong Yimo's portrait before and knew that she was good-looking, but when the real person appeared in front of her, her first reaction was to feel ashamed of her appearance. She really was very good-looking, and this kind of beauty, magnanimity, and calmness was a stunning thing that she had never seen before. No wonder Gong Dai was bewitched by her. She really was a vixen. Longcheng Tingxue forced herself to lower her eyes. She couldn't let the other person sense her hostility. Gong Yimo was amused. She watched as the other person's face changed from joy to an extremely difficult to see calm, and it only took about a second. Her face-changing technique was getting more and more interesting, Gong Yimo thought as she propped up her chin. "Little princess, it's getting late. If you don't have anything else, then get on the carriage. Let's go to the palace to chat, okay?" Gong Yimo looked down from above and said softly. Her casual attitude caused the little princess's heart to distort from anger again. but on the surface, she still had a gentle smile. Then many thanks to your country's princess for welcoming me. Gong Yimo casually waved her hand. You're welcome, Bengong is just following orders. After saying that, the curtain was lowered, cutting off the little princess's resentful gaze. Why was her attitude so high and mighty when they were both princesses? Wasn't she afraid that she would complain to Dai Yu State's emperor? That's right, she heard that Dai Yu State's emperor favored Gong Yimo, that's why she was so fearless. Longcheng Tingxue lowered her head and walked towards her carriage step by step. When she passed by Buji, she gave him a gloomy look. Wasn't it just a princess, and he actually wanted her to pay a visit? Was this person dead? How could she know Gong Yimo's position in the hearts of the men in the world? She could only accept this hidden loss. Set off, a eunuch shouted, and then the imperial guards uniformly escorted Gong Yimo. This scene made Longcheng Tingxue's heart extremely unbalanced. In Lu Yi, everyone doted on her and gave in to her. She had the best food, clothing, and other necessities. But when it came to Lu Yi, she was compared to Gong Yimo at the first meeting. The 200 sets of dowry behind her were not even in her eyes and ignored. In this way, Gong Yimo looked like a princess who was about to get married, and she was like a concubine who followed behind. Gong Yimo must be doing this on purpose. Knowing that she was going to marry Gong Dai, she purposely took her down a notch. Longcheng Tingxue calculated in her heart, and the more she thought about it, the more indignant she felt. She even felt that Gong Yimo asked the imperial guards to accompany her to deliberately make her misunderstand and embarrass herself. What was this kind of public humiliation? If Gong Yimo only knew a little of this kind of trick, then she would die a terrible death. At this moment, the people on both sides cheered. She lifted the curtain to take a look and realized that Gong Yimo had a very high reputation in the hearts of the people of Dai Yu State. Many people lined the streets to welcome her, as if it was an honor to see her. She had never enjoyed this kind of glory when she was in Lu Yi. A cold light flashed in Longcheng Tingxue's eyes, and then she smiled faintly. A very good reputation, huh? Deeply popular, huh? Enjoy this last period of glory, because when she came, she would snatch away everything Gong Yimo had, one by one. With this thought, she steadily lowered the curtain with a gentle smile on her face, and no one could see any evil intentions. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.